Hello, my love, and welcome back to our Cold-Blood and Cocktails compilation series. Better strap your titties down, honey, because today we're talking about psychological horror, cults, and just crazy shit. We're talking about the case where the girl was kept in the freaking dungeon or like a drain pipe. And why not talk about the real exorcism story? That costume will give you nightmares. Thank you so much for being here, and let's dive into it. All right, my darlings, cheers to you. So grab your winter coat, your long underwear, your flannel bra, because we're taking our asses all the way back to rural winter Quebec. Quebec? How do you say it? Comment down below. It's just gonna be a bunch of people commenting Quebec. I don't know, but the snow is that kind of silent, suffocating white that makes you feel like you're walking on a maxi pad. And then there's that yellow spot and it's me drunkenly peeing behind the tree like, hi. No, but imagine you're standing barefoot outside a log cabin in the middle of buttfuckville nowhere. The wind is cutting through your skin like a Temu razor you should have switched out 2 weeks ago. And across from you, grinning like he's about to give a TED Talk on how to be God's favorite little bitch boy, is Rock Therault? Damn, I am not doing good with this pronunciation stuff today. He was the cult leader, the prophet, and the human embodiment of a rabid baby-dicked raccoon that found a bottle of apple pie moonshine. He's holding a kitchen knife and you don't know if it's for the carrots on the table or for your fingers. With this man, there's no way to tell. One of your fellow family members, because here you're not followers, you're God's children, they've apparently sinned. And by sinned, I mean she looked at Rock the wrong way, left the toilet seat down, didn't put enough raisins in the bread dough, or maybe she was a little bit toothy with her head game that day. Whatever it was, Rock decided that the only solution is punishment. He orders her to strip down completely, and not for anything sexual either. This dude somehow managed to be both a horny-ass creep and disturbingly asexual when he's dishing out his worst punishments. Nah, this sick fuck wanted this poor woman to feel humiliation. He wanted control. He was like the kid during someone else's birthday party that tries to blow out the birthday candles. Oh my God, those annoying little shits. His nips would leak liquid gold if he could break people down until they'd rather chew on wasabi flavor barbed wire than challenge him again. And I'm all for fun nicknames, but this guy was a little bit of a weenie. He called himself Moses, but instead of parting the Red Sea, he'd part people from their teeth, their toes, and sometimes literal body parts. So here he is standing over this poor young lady who's just trembling her tits off and dramatically tells her that God is speaking through him, which, if that's true, then God must have been on angel dust that day because he's apparently dictating orders like, hit her with a belt, then pour boiling water on her back. The other members are just sitting there in total and complete silence. Glenn and Janice are more stunned than when their daughter told them she was joining a lesbian bowling league, but they're all too scared to say shit about shit. They know better than to interfere. This isn't just punishment, this is the show, and Rock, he is the only star. Okay, Rachel Berry, get your shit together, sir. And who the hell, might you be wondering, is this weirdo? Well, Rock was born in 1947 in Quebec, whatever, to a very, very strict family. And when I say strict, I mean guilt was like a second language kind of strict. And we've covered several of those kinds of killers, and I can't say it ever ends well. And of course, as a kid, he was smart, charming, and had that annoying as shit talent of convincing you he knew more than you did, even if he was dead ass wrong. Gah, I went to school with kids like that, and they could convince a teacher to give them a hall pass, and they'd be gone for like the rest of the period. Probably to smoke a joint with the janitor. Could have at least invited me. But of all the things someone with that talent could use it on, this dude had to become this? Anyways, he dropped out of school in like the 7th grade, but instead of working the land like everyone else, he developed a taste for drama, attention, and being the center of every conversation. Oh shit, you know, some of these people are so relatable. Oh, but I don't kill people. That's the big difference. By his 20s, he'd married young, shot a couple kids out his splooge socket, and was working in construction. But Rock hated hard work almost as much as he loved controlling people. Like, ew calluses, ew sweat, ew grime. Again, though, relatable. Ah, shit. His stage? Oh, it was the world, and the world, that was his oyster. He wanted to be adored, obeyed, and preferably worshipped, but without putting in an honest day's labor, so he pivoted to religion. At first, it was harmless, just your average bearded hippie in the 1970s, dabbling in the Bible studies and alternative health, pine sap soap, no shoes, and so many trees to hug. And then, one day, he discovered the Seventh-day Adventist church, and oh mama, he was hooked. That place was like his nicotine. That shit made his donkey kick, it made his pudding pop, and his whistle wet. I mean, the end of the world was coming and everyone needed to repent, and most importantly, they needed a leader. What perfect timing too, because guess who volunteered for that role? He became obsessed with the idea that the apocalypse, it wasn't just near, it was basically next Tuesday, so get your canned goods ready right the hell now, damn it. Like right now, right Now. Do it. Get you that canned cream corn. Oh shit, though I do love canned green beans. Oh, and green bean casserole. So Rock started building a little following amongst the other Adventists, charming them with his back to the land philosophy. Leave the cities, he'd preach. They're full of sin and corruption. Also, to his pure bafflement, the city was full of people who wouldn't listen to his bullfuckery. Imagine that. So in 1977, he gathered a small little group of loyal followers, mostly women, because even though he was a creep, the ladies loved that shit. Like, remember Charles Manson? It's like he was a moldy looking chick magnet. I don't fucking get it. But these ladies, they love that moldy, musty, dusty D. Regardless, he took these little ladies and moved them out to the wilderness of Ste. Marie, Quebec. Fuck, I'm gonna Google this. How to pronounce Quebec? Quebec, or Quebec?
Quebec.
Well, fuck. You know what? We're calling it Quebec. They built a commune together, hammering away in the snow until little cabins speckled the landscape like a Kincaid painting in your Caucasian sister-in-law's sitting room. They all have one. Rock declared they were God's children working together like ants in an anthill, thus the name the Anthill Kids. Did you see the ants on my face? And I don't really think of a winter cult. I always picture cornfields in summertime. Who wants to be in a cult in the winter? Ew. But life on the commune started all happy. It was all boobies and buttercups with big smiles and big promises. Fresh veggies, clean water, none of that evil city influence. Just a pure little Eden where everyone loved each other and worked together like ants. Except in Rock's Eden, there was no apple tree. The only forbidden fruit was questioning Rock. And the punishment for biting into that fruit was whatever hellish, sadistic thing he felt like dishing out that day. At first, his control was kinda on the DL, like that totally straight guy on Grindr who wants to try anal but is definitely, totally, 100% not gay. Yeah, this guy was on the low-low. His shit was more on the subtle side. He started calling Karen a fatty patty, and that led to him dictating what everyone ate, which was fine because he was just looking out for their waistlines. Now that he read that Jenny Craig book, he was all about that whole diet life. Well, now that everyone's fit as fuck, he starts giving Lenny the side-eye because he was being a lazy sack of shit, so he'd dictate when they worked. And people did start kind of think maybe he was putting the dick in dictator, but at this point, they were so brainwashed and model thin, they didn't even have the wherewithal to speak up. And when they would start to speak up, Rock realized these people wouldn't have the brain power to speak up if I controlled their sleep cycles, so he did that too. He decided who could have sex with who, which naturally almost always meant himself. The women, he declared, were chosen to bear his holy children because he was the true prophet, and apparently the G upstairs had him on a strict and aggressive breeding program. His wives grew in number, but overall, his followers started pulling out, which is more than I could say about Rock. But his ego was swelling up like a sponge soaking up spilled vodka, and so was his cruelty. His punishments went from humiliation to full-blown sadism. He beat people with belts and hammers, and if they really pissed him off, he'd have them stand naked in the snow for hours like some fraternity hazing. One of his favorite tricks was to make people strip down into their birthday suit and then dress them in the weirdest costumes ever. Otherwise, the ladies had to wear identical full-length green tunics, and then the men wore beige tunics. Sometimes he'd shave their heads, sometimes he'd smear them in mud or ashes. Once he forced a woman to wear a sheep carcass like a coat while the rest of the group threw insults at her. This was like a terrible drag queen roast. The twisted theater of it wasn't a side effect, it was the point. Like, he loved this. And get this shit, he'd make followers break their own legs with sledgehammers just to prove their loyalty. A full-on Kathy Bates misery moment, but to themselves. I'm sorry, but my own mama could be like, go break your leg with a hammer, and I'd be like, bye, Felicia. I guess he even once nailed a kid to a tree, literally nailed their hand like a fucking crucifix, and like, I'm not a fan of kids, as we can probably tell, but holy tits on a tractor, that is fucked up. He was also pretty handsy with a blowtorch too, which I'll let you use your imagination with what he did with that. But what the hell, right? This psycho wasn't just abusive, he liked to play doctor too. Whenever someone got sick or injured, which was probably because of something he himself did to them, Rock was always like, nope, no doctor for you. Urgent care? Like, fuck that. He was convinced he could heal them himself, and his treatments were insane. Like, he'd slice into people's skin with a dull hunting knife, pour alcohol into the wound, and then stitch him up with fishing line. No drugs, no rag to bite on, and if you passed out from the pain, he'd accuse you of being possessed by Satan and start cutting somewhere else just to try to wake you up. What an absolute turd. We haven't even taken a suspicion shot. This whole thing is suspicious. One of the ladies complained about a stomach ache, and in Rock's deranged brain, this meant her intestines needed cleansing. He sedated her with homebrew alcohol, cut her open, and began rummaging around like he'd lost his car keys in the drawer. He removed parts of her intestines, poured molasses and olive oil into her body cavity, and stitched her up. She lasted a whole day before she died in agony. And even after witnessing that, the group stayed. They were like, yeah, that seems like a normal response. I think I saw a treatment just like that on Grey's Anatomy. Sure, they mourned this woman, but they swore she was a saint, convinced her death was holy. Rock spun it into prophecy. He told them that she'd volunteered to die for their salvation, as though her death was somehow gonna make the gods grow crops or some shit. Maybe it'd make them even more potent. And just like that, a horrific killing became another brick in the cult's warped, fucked up mind. Through it all, the group worked like literal ants, hauling wood, hauling ass, planting crops, and tending to Rock's endless needs. And wouldn't you know it, the food started running out, and this was partially because they were in the middle of nowhere, but mostly because Rock hoarded it for himself and rationed it to his peoples. His loyal followers were able to play their ribs like the xylophone in Somebody That I Used to Know, and Rock would be in his cabin eating mounds of food, throwing it up into his fireplace, then eating as much as he possibly could again. And yet, no one left because he'd conditioned them to believe the outside world was total hell and chaos, that God would strike them like a metal pole in a storm if they ran. This wasn't just a commune anymore, it was a voluntary prison with snow-covered walls, and every prisoner had handed him the key. They still called him Papa, some of the spicier male followers called him Daddy, and they still believed he was saving them. They still suckled his little nuggets on the daily. And here was Rock, strutting around like a king, drunk on power, moonshine, and his own demented belief that he was handpicked by the GOD. His beard got wilder, his eyes more glassy, his speech is more rambling, and the grip he had on these people, stronger than ever. The real pisser, authorities knew the Anthill kids existed. They knew Rock was dangerous, but they kept shrugging it off because from the outside, it looked like just another weird commune in the woods. No one realized they were sitting on a powder keg. By now it was like 1989, and for over a decade, Rock had kept his little human anthill a-buzzing with fear, pain, and a sick kind of loyalty. But every reign of terror eventually has to hit its breaking point, and Rock's came when a follower finally got the fuck out. The escapee wasn't just running from a bad camping trip, they were running from one of Rock's surgeries, and you know what the fuck we mean by that. I guess this particular follower had suffered a little bit of an injury on the commune, really nothing that should have been life or death. But in Rock's mind, the only real cure was to amputate the damaged parts himself. And by damaged, I mean like not actually damaged enough to require amputation. His toolkit, a kitchen knife, a hacksaw, and his normal medical training of a drunk raccoon. No anesthetic, no sterilization, just him hacking away while the other cult members held the poor soul down. The victim obviously survived the procedure, barely, but it left them in absolute agony. And maybe it was the pain, maybe it was the shock, maybe it was the creeping realization that they thought they signed up for a cute little club and ended up in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I don't know, but they knew this was their only chance to leave. So they slipped away, limping through the snow until they found civilization. Which reminds me of that M. Night Shyamalama Ding Dong movie, The Village. Have you seen that? Oh, that shit is fucking wild. One of my favorite movies. But this is kind of like that, but also not really. Well, but though kinda. Anyways, when they staggered into the hospital, bleeding, frostbitten, and missing a chunk of themselves, the medical staff went apeshit. This wasn't just assault, this was proof of everything the townspeople gossiped about in jest, but nobody truly believed. It turned out all the rumors were true. Police were called, and this time they didn't just shrug, they hauled their asses to the commune like a bachelor party to a strip club. Rock was arrested along with several of his most loyal followers, and the famdamly, now terrified and confused, was dismantled, finally, in a matter of hours. When cops did get a hold of him, Rock didn't break down, he didn't even cry, he didn't even deny anything. He strutted his holy hiney into custody like it was just another chapter in his godly mission. He told the cops they were pawns of Satan, he told reporters this was God's work, and in one particularly nauseating moment, he insisted that the amputations, the beatings, and literal murders were acts of love. Oh, gag me, let's take a sip for that. The trial was a media-feeding frenzy like hyenas on an antelope. The details coming out in court were so weird and brutal and so bizarre that even seasoned journalists were gagging. Rock was charged with first-degree murder plus multiple accounts of aggravated assault. His own followers took the stand, some still visibly broken, describing in detail how he'd mutilated them in the name of healing and punished them in the name of God. Rock would have loved being in the prosecution because they did not have to work hard at all. They had bodies, they had survivors, they had a man on the stand who smugness practically screamed, "Convict me." And in 1993, the jury didn't hesitate at all. Rock was sentenced to life in prison with no parole for 25 years. You'd think that'd be the end, but in prison, Rock still played the prophet. He got himself a new little fan club behind bars. Like, why the fuck didn't he use his talent for good in politics? Like, the charisma never turned off. The only thing that changed was his audience. He ended up dying in 2011, murdered by another inmate. I guess he pissed off the wrong person. And honestly, for a man who lived like he was untouchable, dying at the hands of someone else was the final plot twist he never saw coming. The Anthill kids were scattered, their commune abandoned to rot in the woods, and I guess what's left today is just a creepy shell of cabins, which might still be there. I'll have to Google them. But I guess it's the kind of place you could film a horror movie without changing a damn thing. It seems as though people aren't sure if they've been burnt down or if they are dismantled. Huh, very interesting though, right? How sad. All those people had to be chopped up. Some people died. It is so easy to fall into a cult, isn't it? You don't even know you're in one and then suddenly you're in green robes watching someone dance naked around a fire. Been there. We're going to start our case way back in January of 1975, where a 17-year-old heiress named Leslie Whittle was snuggled up in her little bed when all of a sudden she was awoken by a shadow cutting across her room. Sphincter was clenched, mama. And if this wasn't scary enough to shoot your tampon across the room, the shadow suddenly stopped. Leslie's like, "Grandma, are you ambient sleepwalking again?" But nothing spoke back. Whatever this was lingering in the corner like a Taco Bell fart, and then suddenly the shadow lurched towards her. Standing at the end of her bed was a man dressed head to toe in black, wearing a ski mask and holding a sawed-off hillbilly shotgun. All this guy does is tell her to put her nightgown on and come with him. Of course she does, because what the fuck else was she gonna do? Oh god, this choker is tight. Normally I wouldn't mind, but not today. Anyways, this young girl was marched out into the freezing night barefoot, confused, terrified as tits, and wondering what was next. She had no idea that her final destination was a dark, damp sewage shaft in a remote park where the psychopath had rigged up like a personal dungeon. Meanwhile, back inside her house, the family woke up to an empty bed, an open window, and a shipping label stuck to the floor with packing tape. And written on the shipping label in big black marker were the words, "Pay 50,000 pounds or she dies." Ooh, girl, that's a lot of money. I don't know if I'd do it. No, I'm totally joking. Fuck. But the whole thing looks like the killer had a day job at the Office Depot and had a serious packing tape fetish. The shit was everywhere, stuck to lamps, banisters, the television, and the underwear drawer, on the Instant Pot, and even Goof Off wouldn't clean this shit up. The family calls the police, but they're immediately warned that if they got the po-pos involved, the girl would be dead. This creep had picked a spot months, maybe even years earlier, a place called Bathpool Park near Kids Grove. This was deep in the woods too, where like if you weren't careful, you would find a tick on the dick, and there were like old drainage covers, and I guess underneath that there's like a vertical ventilation shaft that's like 50 feet deep, and that's where he left her, tethered by a steel wire around her neck, which he lovingly padded with elastoplast bandages, because apparently if you're gonna imprison a teenager in a hole, at least be gentle about it. Just how sweet. And because he was just such a kind soul, he even zhuzhed the place up a little bit for her. And this dude's convinced it'll work too, that he'll get the cash, she'll survive, and he'll walk away with enough money for a whole month of Starbucks. Spoiler alert, he doesn't, she doesn't, and the whole plan, it goes straight to hell. Ooh, what's jiggling? Is it my earrings or my necklace? We'll go more into that a little bit later though, because before he became a teenage girl abducting, sewage shaft, dungeon decorating, tape wielding creep, Donald Nielsen was just another boring dude with an inferiority complex the size of Jupiter. Nielsen was born Donald Nappy in 1936 in a dreary little Yorkshire town. I mean, if you want to guarantee your kid a lifelong bitterness complex, name him after a British diaper. So, shocker, Donald eventually dumped Nappy for Nielsen, trying to sound all rugged and manly and totally not like a children's teething toy. His childhood, of course, was not the best. Dad died early, leaving Donald to stew with a mother who basically taught him that if life shits on you, you double down and stomp back even harder. As he grew up, he just wanted to prove himself, so naturally he did the most predictable thing for a sad boy with something to prove. He joined the army. Nielsen signed up for the King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry in 1953, just convinced that this would transform him from local diaper joke to badass war hero. And in some ways, I guess it did. Like, the military gave him structure and skills, but also a solid and unhealthy taste for weapons. And unfortunately, instead of using those skills to say, I don't know, save civilians or build homes for the poor, Nielsen decided to use them for armed robbery and other crimes because, of course. Fast forward through a completely uneventful military career, he made it to corporal and then bounced around odd jobs, including working on buildings. And then by the early 1960s, he'd married Irene Tate and they had a daughter. But he put on the whole happy family facade and people assumed that good old Donnie boy was just a great guy. But we're here, of course, so underneath that daddy next door routine, he was stewing with resentment over being broke, unimpressive, and generally an underwhelming human. Nielsen wanted cash, power, and respect. I mean, get in line, you little bitch. Who the fuck doesn't? So he put all his army skills to use, deciding to transform from average schlub to super criminal. And you'd think he'd be like a smart Ocean's 11 style thief with all that training, but honey, shut the fuck up and sit your ass down because this guy could trip over wind. So he started small, robbing sub-post offices all across England. He was like, yeah, this is my shit. Quiet, rural, sleepy little postmasters with a tiny safe and no alarm system? Chef's kiss for a wannabe subpar villain. So between 1967 and 1974, he pulled off dozens of these post office heists, creeping around like a Dollar Tree ninja. They called him Black Panther because he wore all black, moved quickly, and was, I guess, marginally cat-like in his delusions. Meaning, he shat in litter boxes, I'm assuming. But let's be real, he wasn't exactly a panther, more like a pissed-off possum with vertigo and a sawed-off shotgun. Nielsen's idea of a burglary was to storm in barking orders, scaring the absolute shit out of the clerks, taking a few $100, and then bolting out before the village Bobby even had time to finish his cuppa. But he wanted bigger. Get in line for that, too. The fantasy of a bigger payday just burned a hole in his mind like an old car cigarette lighter until he convinced himself that all he needed was to score a big, massive ransom, which is where we bring in poor Leslie Whittle. Well, not literally poor. Far from it, in fact. Leslie was the only daughter of George Whittle, a very wealthy businessman who'd built a fortune in the coach company trade, basically rolling in enough cash to make her a prime target. And I think she had had a little bit of media coverage in the newspaper over an inheritance that she was getting, and Nielsen stalked the shit out of this family for months, learning their routines, their security flaws, their house layout, you know, the usual creeper shit that we see on here. And then by January of 1975, he was finally ready. In between coughing up furballs and licking his own ass, Nielsen had been playing out the entire night in his sick little brain, and tonight was finally the night. So we find ourselves back in that bedroom where Leslie had been peacefully dreaming before Sir Shit for Brains and a ski mask turned her life into a literal nightmare. After he snatched her from the bed, barefoot, nightgown flapping in the cold like a dog's jowls, he forced her into the car and drove into the night. Nielsen, who kind of considered himself an Elon Musk of criminal innovation, had chosen a ventilation shaft 50 feet deep. And in there was a little tiny platform that you could stand on if you didn't mind rats, mold, and the faint smell of wet dish rags. But he'd basically turned this shaft into a twisted Airbnb from hell. He had that steel cable tied around Leslie's neck with padding on it, because deep down, I think he really thought this plan would work and he really didn't want to make her uncomfortable, allegedly. The police photos from the Bathpool Park showed a damp hellhole so vile you'd think Satan himself would say, "No, that's even a bit much for me." And the platform that she was stuck on was rickety as fuck. The ladder rungs were rusty and falling apart, and it was pitch black. Nielsen, bless him, had left a flashlight, but the batteries were garbage. Like, sure, thanks, Don, real luxury resort, 2 out of 10 stars on VEVO for you. There's a crusty old sleeping bag in the corner as if that somehow made it cozy and homey. And how the fuck was she supposed to get into the sleeping bag when her neck was tied by a wire? And food, she had canned goods in a water flask, hardly fit for a prisoner, let alone a terrified 17-year-old. And the police found a leftover chocolate bar because I guess even monsters think that hostages need a little treaty treat. Every time you study that setup, you realize that Nielsen was the king of half-assed villainy. He had the evil vision, but really lacked in execution. And his stupidity ended up costing Leslie her life. Oh my god, I just realized I'm missing the lamp that goes back behind me. I thought it looked a little bit empty. Well, next time. Well, if Leslie stepped off this little platform, she would die by hanging herself because of the cable. And that cable around her neck went all the way to the top of the shaft so that Donald could lift her if he needed. By the neck, like a fucked up bungee jumping Barbie. This was just the mind of a man who had watched way too many DIY crime shows and decided to go full Home Depot Hannibal Lecter. Leslie was left there terrified, alone, and straining against the steel wire. Nielsen, meanwhile, swaggered his ass off to await ransom calls, certain his master plan would succeed. The family, of course, was in total meltdown mode. I mean, wouldn't you be? You wake up and your daughter's gone, like fuck me sideways with a box cutting blade. Of course you'd be scared. The police did end up getting involved because, duh, you don't not call the police in this kind of situation. But Nielsen was watching, paranoid, convinced they'd screw it all up, which they kinda did. The plan to deliver the ransom fell apart faster than a Shein bikini in a hot tub. Confusion, delays, missed signals. My god, it sounds like my last relationship. And Leslie, she was still all alone in that shaft while the adults above were trying to coordinate a ransom that wouldn't result in her death. Nielsen had rigged the wire so fucking poorly and incompetently that if Leslie so much as slipped off her little platform, the steel cable around her neck would pull tight. And that's exactly what happened. No dramatic showdown, no rescue in the nick of time, just a tragic, heartbreaking accident orchestrated by an incompetent monster who thought he was the world's biggest criminal genius but just suffered from baby dick syndrome. And once Leslie was dead, the Black Panther decided it was time for him to vanish just like a wet queef on the tennis court. This dude thought he was just the bee's knees, the absolute tits, the ultimate puppet master, pulling everyone's strings, and then when the show went to shit, he snuck off stage before anyone could boo him like a classic coward. Meanwhile, the entire country was about to have a collective aneurysm, and they were well in their right to have a little bitch fit. The police had totally bungled the ransom drop, the family was in shreds, and the tabloids were foaming at the mouth because a teenage heiress had been kidnapped and killed by a shadowy asshat that nobody could track. Cops were tearing their hair out like, who was this man? How could he have rigged a medieval-style dungeon inside a sewer pipe, killed a girl, and then ghosted out of existence like a bad Grindr hookup? Well, let's remember the Black Panther had been practicing for years, which is really sad because if he was that shitty at something he'd practiced for years, imagine how terrible he was spontaneously. But good old Donnie boy, he actually was not new to this kind of terror. He'd been ramping up to this final hideous act through a series of burglaries and murders that should have told everyone he was basically a sociopathic powder keg with a short-ass fuse. Of course, he did have his burglaries, but he wasn't satisfied just waving his gun around like a drunk uncle helicoptering his willy at Thanksgiving. Wait, didn't everyone's uncle do that? You know what? Never mind. Point is, he killed before Leslie. Multiple people in these stick-up jobs he had been doing died because Nielsen didn't just want the money, he wanted to dominate. This was his sick thrill, like, girl, just try a little choking in bed or something, shit. His first murder victim was Donald Skepper, a sub-postmaster. Nielsen just shot him dead while robbing the post office, and the police were left scratching their scrotes with that one. Nielsen was as slippery as spawn cum. No, fuck. Pond scum. There we go. Next was Derek Aston, another postmaster. Aston had tried to resist, and Nielsen, proving that he was the ultimate chicken shit of a human, shot him too. Then came Sidney Grayland, a retired sub-postmaster who Nielsen also murdered while searching for money. So by the time Leslie Whittle's case rolled around, the Black Panther wasn't just some random guy who had snapped overnight. He was a fully seasoned ass munch with a juicy kill count. And what really chills you is the planning. Nielsen mapped out everything to a T, the escape routes, the timing, the locations. He was methodical, but also dumb enough to leave a trail of duct tape that would make any CSI nerd spontaneously climax. The police, though, bless their 1970s hearts, were just chasing shadows. Nobody had invented fancy DNA kits or GPS trackers yet. They were basically Scooby-Dooing it, running around with notepads and their pinkies up each other's butts, trying to match footprints to a psychopath who was 10 clumsy steps ahead of them. But let's swing back to Bathpool Park, where Leslie's body was finally discovered. A police officer found her on March 7th, 1975, still hanging there, her cold body tethered in that awful shaft. It was a scene so disgusting and gruesome that it even made grown men vomit. The newspapers went feral, of course, and the entire countryside demanded blood. Who was this sewer-dwelling, tape-obsessed maniac? The answer would come painfully over the next year as the police linked those post office murders together. Slowly, piece by grimy little piece, they saw that the same ghost in black had been pulling the trigger in every one of those robberies, using the same sawed-off shotgun, the same military swagger, the same I'm a big man because I can terrify defenseless people kind of energy. This guy was simply the school-ground bully of killers. When they realized this, though, Nielsen was still out there plotting his next big move. The man was just unstoppable in his own head. But in reality, he was about as subtle as a clown car crashing into a wind chime store. And the final break came kinda by luck. In December of 1975, Nielsen tried to force a couple, Gerald and Vivian Smith, out of their car at gunpoint. But plot twist, Gerald was not a wilting little flower. The dude fought the fuck back, and in the scuffle, Nielsen lost control of the situation, and the police were finally able to pounce and arrest his ass. Homeboy went from criminal mastermind to hunched old mess in handcuffs in about 2 seconds. Cuffs were his kryptonite, and he was finally defeated. When they did a little searchy search on him, they found enough tape and tools and weapons to basically restock an entire aisle at Walmart. If you wanted evidence of the sick bastard's shopping list, this was it. And by the time Nielsen was dragged into custody, the public was practically sharpening their pitchforks. People wanted to roast him on a spit like a suckling pig, and honestly, who could blame them? But the real show was about to start, the trial. Donald, who thought he was a commando-level supervillain, was now chained up in a courtroom looking about as menacing as a stale crumpet. He now looked like what he was, a bitter, petty, permanently scowling man who'd been dragged from his evil lair by a couple of police officers and a dude with a backbone. And let me tell you, the trial was a circus. The whole country tuned in. People were so hyped to see this monster go down that you'd think they were giving away free Gaga concert tickets outside the courthouse. And the media was having a field day. Black Panther caged in mile-high writing like this was King Kong being shackled on Broadway. Nielsen, of course, tried to lawyer his way out of the gallows with this sympathy card. "I didn't mean for her to die," he claimed about Leslie. Like, buddy, you strung a steel cable around a teenage girl's neck in a 50-foot sewer shaft. What the fuck did you think might happen? His defense was a tragic clown act. He insisted that he was just after the ransom, and all those murders he'd committed, those were just unfortunate accidents. "Sure, Donnie, and I ate that entire cheesecake last night by accident." His own confession showed exactly how much planning had gone into Leslie's abduction, from the wire noose to the 2-star amenities he'd included to the elastoplast around the wire. Like, for fuck's sake, he might as well have painted "I'm a murderer" across his chest like a sports fan's team's colors at a football game. In July of 1976, after weeks of testimony, mountains of evidence, and the entire country screaming for justice, Nielsen was finally convicted. Surprise, surprise, the final verdict? Murder, kidnapping, blackmail, robbery, firearms offenses. It was like he went down the entire British crime checklist and ticked every box. He got life, and the judge basically told him he'd die behind bars, and good riddance. No one was gonna miss this dude's potato salad at the family picnic. And as it turns out, this guy really was no Hannibal Lecter. He was a sloppy, mean, deeply insecure bully who liked to terrify people. His entire criminal career was just one big-ass temper tantrum because the world didn't give him the respect he craved. Nielsen, though, of course, kept trying to play victim. Prison guards reported that he ranted endlessly about how no one understood him and that he was only forced into crime by a cruel world. Bruh, you planned a whole sewer dungeon. Miss us with your tiny violin, bitch. His own family, heartbreakingly, was left shattered too. Irene, his wife, was just blindsided. She had no clue she'd married Britain's most feared serial killer. Their daughter grew up with a horror of being connected to the Black Panther and had to live with that stigma forever. Just another set of innocent victims to Nielsen's bullshit. So, what happened to Donald Nielsen after the cameras left? He rotted in prison. Over the decades, he kept up the same bullshit nonsense. Appeals, complaints, demanding special treatment. At one point, he tried to argue that he should be let out on compassionate grounds because he was sick. I'm sick. You left a teenage girl in a concrete hellhole with a wire noose? Nobody's bringing you tea, scones, and sympathy, my dude. So, he stayed locked up and the world moved on. But not the Whittle family. Leslie's mother, of course, never fully recovered. Her brother Ronald, who had tried desperately to get the ransom to save her, blamed himself for the rest of his life. Nielsen left behind a scorched earth trail of grief that took generations to heal. Nielsen's end finally came in 2011 after decades of prison time. He was 75, old, sick, and looking like a melted Halloween mask. I guess the skincare options in prison aren't the best. I would never survive. They did end up having to move him to a hospital because he was having breathing issues, and he died there alone after being in a wheelchair needing 24-hour care. No one mourned him, no candlelight vigils, no sob stories. Just a cold note in the newspapers that said, Black Panther dead. The world exhaled, turned the page to the crossword puzzle, and moved on. And honestly, that was the best ending possible for a guy who took so much, just quiet, anonymous, and forgotten. What a sad ending. I could not imagine being Leslie. Oh, or even having a family member or somebody that I loved having to go through that. Shit pate on a cracker, that makes me sad. Today's titty twister of a tale starts at a Milwaukee clothing factory in the early 1800s. Dolly was a gorgeous 15-year-old young gal, fresh off the boat from Germany and happier than a hog in hot shit to be a factory worker for a man named Fred. Fred was a few years older than Dolly, but she seemed to bat her eyelashes in all the right ways because soon he was smitten with her. They end up getting hitched when she was 17, and you know all the other factory ladies were pissed. That seamstress Gertrude had been trying to get into Fred's pants for the better part of 6 years, but nope, he chose Dolly and she was titillated. Oh my, suddenly this is an off-the-shoulder frock. Goodness, have some class. Well, despite these two lovebirds' similar interests, their personalities were almost the exact opposite. Fred was respected, but also kind of an asshole to Dolly, and especially to his workers. Oh no, I didn't turn on my light behind me. Hold on. So Dolly, she was definitely the more affectionate one, which kind of made a lot of marital problems, especially because Dolly was out giving affection to every Dick and Johnson she met, if you know what I'm saying. She had a libido the size of Argentina and wanted to tango a bit more than Fred, and no matter how many times Fred would play hide the sausage with her, it just wasn't enough. I get it, girl. So Dolly would have her way with a guy in the grocery store bathroom, see another dude on her way back home, have a quickie in the back of the buggy, then forget about them both before her head hit the pillow that night. Yes, wild and loose Dolly was, for years in fact. Even throughout Fred and Dolly's son's teenage years, she would sneak out and hook up almost daily. Unfortunately though, their son grew very ill and ended up dying, and this left both Fred and Dolly in complete shock. Fred started drinking even more than he usually did, and Dolly was so grief-stricken she could barely cope. But it wasn't long till her coping turned back into copping feels, and she was picking up men left, right, and center again. Until one day, a lone man became her one and only, aside from, you know, her husband, Fred. He doesn't count, at least that's what Dolly thought. At this point, Dolly had slept her way up the ranks of Fred's factory and was now observing the workers while he was out on a bender. And son of a bitch, one of the sewing machines broke down. She called the Singer Sewing Repair Line and they were like, okay, we'll send a guy out right now. And holy shit, when he arrived to the factory, Dolly had to freaking wring out her undies. This repairman was the sexiest creature she'd ever laid eyes on, and if she didn't get his meatloaf in her oven, her thermometer would burst. Of course, this was now 1903. She was 36 and been married for 15 years. And this young man had basically been her son's age, a teenager, but that didn't stop her. Oh my, ooh. In fact, in between her lust, she seemed to feel a maternal instinct, which she kind of thought made things even hotter. Yes, honey, I could still get that. Well, this is just giving serious Norman and Norma Bates vibes, right? This kid's name was Otto. He was maybe 16 or 17, had blue eyes, blonde hair. He was stacked like a brick house, and damn, Dolly wanted to climb his chimney. Okay, yeah, that is definitely creepy, right? Can we get a suspicious shot for that? Like, he's literally half her age and a teenager. My goodness, it's like we're in Hollywood. Otto had been orphaned and then adopted, but he really didn't feel close to his adopted family. He just wanted a mother and craved a female's touch. Can we get a mommy issue shot? Because brace your titties for what's coming up, baby. Well, Otto fixes the machine and leaves, but Dolly can't stop thinking about his soft, boyish charm. That young teenage acne was just doing it for her. She gave it the weekend to let her kitty cool down, but by Monday, she couldn't take it anymore. She had to call Singer and see Otto again. And how perfect, too, because she'd accidentally dropped her home sewing machine from the second floor window just that morning. The company sends Otto over to her house to make the repair, and fortunately, Fred was down at the factory. She told Otto on the phone that when you get here, just walk right in. The machine is in the last room down the hall on the left. So he rings the doorbell, walks in, and heads down the hall. And there it was, the busted sewing machine across from the busty lady sitting on the bed who seemed to be only wearing a thin bathrobe. Could you make it any less obvious, Dolly? Shit. Oh man, did his rooster cluck at the sight of her sitting on those silky sheets? But he was handy and he was there for a job. Did that mean he was there for a hand job? He was like, nope, 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 self-control. He tried his hardest to picture his great-grandma showering and got to work repairing the machine on the dresser. He didn't even mind that Dolly watched, but you know, it was the weirdest thing. Every time he looked back up at her, her robe seemed to have opened just an inch more. This embarrassed Otto probably just as much as it aroused him, which really twisted his buttons even harder. He looked up one more time and, well, now she's just sitting there with one titty out and he just loses his shit. They lunge at each other like monkeys fighting over a Twinkie and the passion begins. And it continues 8 times in one ecstasy-laden evening. 8 times, really? I don't think even as a teenager I could have. Well, I just hope they had Gatorade handy. He made her teapot boil so good that over the next 3 years, the pair's pillow talk continued in secret. Dolly would call in sick to Fred at the factory, and she and Otto would paint Dolly's bedroom white. Ew, huh. But count on the neighbors to stick their dick where it doesn't belong. Because Mildred next door approached Fred one day and said, so, who's that young boy who's here every day? And Fred's like, the fuck you just say? And he says, Dolly, what the hell is Matador or Matilda or whatever her name is next door? What is she talking about? And Dolly, who's quick on her back but even quicker on her feet, just laughed and said, oh honey, don't worry about it. It's just a book salesman. He's been pestering me. I think she meant penetrating me, but who am I to split hairs? Fred was like, oh, okay. Dolly, whose uterus had jumped to her throat from fright, went straight to Otto's boarding room and was like, look here, you sexy little bitch. You can't be sliding in and out of my house anymore. No, that's not even a euphemism. How about you move out of this dump and into my attic? Otto's like, fuck to the yes, I will. Not only did this mean he'd get his rocks off all day, every day with the magic muff MILF, he'd get free room and board, like hell yeah. He'd basically have to give up his entire life in the outside world, including his repairman job. But this totally worked out because his true passion was writing, and now he'd have plenty of time to do that. So she cleaned the top floor, got it all ready for him with a nice bed, a chamber pot, and an oil lamp. And while Fred was at work, Otto snuck his little buns in and made himself right at home. During the day, Otto would put on a sexy little maid outfit. He'd wash dishes, dust, cook, and basically act as a sex slave slash housekeeper. If Fred was out of the house, Otto was free to diddle Dolly or roam the home as he pleased. Of course, Dolly did still have a role at Fred's company, but she'd turn to him and be like, I'm sick, and he'd say, well, take the day off, damn. And she would do this frequently enough to be able to build a pretty strong relationship with Otto. But not everything was perfect. After all, Otto was living secretly above Fred and Dolly's bedroom, so he couldn't even move while they were sleeping. This also meant he'd hear Dolly and her husband do the freak nasty a few times a week, and man, did that put him into a jealous rage. Or maybe that gave him a jealous rage, or I'm not sure. The facts are a little bit misty. But Dolly knew that Otto was just right there, so while Fred would be putting some moan in his mayonnaise, Dolly would be like, shh, you don't want anyone to hear. Fred's like, who the hell would hear us? And Dolly's like, well, you never know. Suspicious shot, anyone? And if not being able to move around in the night didn't suck enough to keep Fred out of the attic, Dolly put a fucking padlock on the door, which kept him out but locked Otto in. She's like, oh, I just want my furs to be in a safe place. Girl, like anyone's gonna steal your rat skins. Well, a year goes by and Fred is becoming more and more troubled. 2 weeks ago, he swore he heard somebody ripping ass right above them, and last night, he knew he heard someone cough in the attic. He says, Dolly, what in the actual fuck was that noise? Like, I know you heard that sneeze just now. She says, oh, Fred, you crazy loon, shut the hell up and go back to sleep. You're imagining things. So he sits back in bed, shuts his eyes, and hears the biggest belch ever from right above them. He shoots up and says, that right there, like, what the hell was that? And Dolly giggles and says, you freaking psychopath, that's mice or a pigeon up there. Shut up and go to sleep. So he did. But the noises weren't the only thing confusing Fred. He and Dolly would go out on a date, but then when they'd come back, the fridge would have been pilfered through. It seemed as though Dolly would unlock the attic door before the date, and Otto would go ham on their turkey or anything else he could get his hands on. Dolly would say, Fred, get a hold of yourself. You ate all that shit last night on one of your booze benders. He'd see bites taken out of the liverwurst, chunks missing from the bread, and would think, my God, I must turn into a drunken Hulk. And he believed it. The poor guy was getting mentally fucked while his wife was getting literally fucked. But this lifestyle was starting to get to Otto. He was basically a prisoner in a luxurious sex prison. So he would sit in the attic window and daydream about fantastic adventures and beaches. He'd write all day about these fantasies and then submit these writings to magazines hoping to be published. He wanted the security and mothering nurture from Dolly, but he also wanted a separate life somehow. Well, one day while Fred was tending to his back garden, he looked up towards the attic window and son of a bitch, there was a young man sitting in it. They looked at each other for a split second and then Otto pulled back, shitting into his chamber pot from fright. Fred flew into the house, yelled for Dolly, and was like, there's somebody in our attic. Dolly says, you are crazy, but I'll go look. And Fred says, no, I'll go look. And Dolly's like, no, I'll look. You're overworked, you drink too much, you're tired, now your ass is seeing things. Fred pulls back yet again and says, yeah, you're right, maybe I should see a doctor, which he did, and they prescribed him fucking horse tranquilizers. And I'm sure Dolly was just giddy with glee over this. All she had to do was pop one of those tranks in Fred's pea soup, and she and Otto could go to Shagville. 1910 slowly creeps along, and by now Fred and Dolly are wanting a new house. But top on their must-have list isn't a gourmet kitchen or butler's pantry. No, they must have an ample attic. After all, Dolly has to store her furs. They find a house, and of course Otto secretly moves in with them, and lucky for him, he's not above Dolly's bedroom anymore. Things were literally looking up for Otto and Dolly too, like their affair was going strong for 7 years, but Fred was kind of going downhill fast. The marriage was falling apart. He was always drinking, depressed, combative, or just rude. And in Dolly's mind, there really wasn't any way that she could leave. She'd be left with nothing, and there was no way that they could live off Otto's writing alone. Otto at this point was 24 and in his sexual prime, so he was frying Dolly's bacon multiple times a day, and they were in love. Well, one night, Dolly and Fred were trying to rekindle their embers, and they were having a little date, and of course got into a heated argument at the restaurant. Fred stormed out, leaving Dolly behind, and headed straight home and went right into the kitchen. Well, what in the cinnamon snorting bullshit is this? There was a young man in his kitchen eating his rack of barbecue ribs. Otto freezes, and so does Fred, and they're both like, what in the hell are you doing here? Otto's like, I'm just hungry, and Fred's like, you've been the one breaking in and eating all my meat. Get the fuck out. Well, little did Fred know that his wife had in fact been eating Otto's meat. After threatening to kill him and make slippers out of his ass cheeks, Fred kicks him out into the street, still with no idea that the man lived right above him. Clearly, this wasn't gonna work out for Otto and Dolly anymore, so they were like, what should we do? Otto says, well, we could move to LA so I could take my writing career even farther. So Dolly starts putting a bug in Fred's ear that California is the place they ought to be. So they packed up their bags and literally moved to Beverly Hills, that is. The married couple found a very nice hotel to stay at, while of course Otto had to stay at the shitty motel down the street. And this worked out splendidly because nobody in LA knew of them. So at any point during the day, Dolly could sneak off with Otto, hold hands in public, kiss on the sidewalk, get finger blasted in the pasta aisle at the corner store, literally anything they wanted. Till finally, Dolly found a big ass house with a ginormous attic. Soon though, Otto kind of grew tired of LA, but Fred, oh shit, he was thriving. He was reborn from the sunshine. But nonetheless, Fred was still kind of an asshole, and Dolly was madly in love with Otto, and the feeling was mutual. The roaring 20s come along, and one night Fred and Dolly come back home and are arguing like a scene from The Real Housewives. They're screaming so damn loud Otto can hear them all the way up in the attic, and suddenly heard both of them yell followed by a thud. He's thinking, shit, that bastard hit my gal! So he grabs his 2 little handguns and rushes downstairs expecting to see Dolly knocked out cold. Turns out Fred had just slipped over one of their new throw rugs, but now the jig was up. Once again, Otto and Fred were standing face to face, and Fred's like, you're the dude that was eating my barbecue ribs. And then it dawned on Fred, this is why his wife was always calling in sick yet was still so damn happy all the time. She was getting her super soaker squirted by a man a quarter of his age. And it must be serious too if this guy was now in LA along with them. Everything suddenly made sense to Fred, and so he lunged furiously at Otto to grab his guns. They scramble around on the floor, Fred with his hands wrapped around Otto's neck. And before Dolly could pull them apart, Otto panicked and shot 3 rounds into Fred. He immediately died, and Dolly and Otto started to freak the fuck out. Dolly's thinking, how could this happen? And Otto's thinking, how can we cover this up? Otto says, you know what? I've got it. Let's fake a burglary. This was a moment he'd been writing about for years. It was his time to shine. Unfortunately, though, in all the wrong ways. He's like, I'll lock you in the closet, take Fred's diamond watch off his wrist, make a bit of a mess, and then hide upstairs. So they do just that, which is perfect because a neighbor had heard the gunshots and called the police. The cops break in the front door, find the closet key thrown on the floor, let her out, and then take her in for questioning. But instantly, the cops kind of become suspicious of her, despite the fact that she was bawling on the floor, screaming out Fred's name. And they ask her, did you and your husbando ever fight? This bitch, she deadass says, no, never. The cops say, never? And Dolly's like, no, never. Well, we all know that no marriage is perfect. Everyone fights sometimes, so this looks hella suspicious. But the cops also noticed that at the crime scene, the only thing that was missing was Fred's diamond watch, not the wallet full of cash that was in his back pocket or the jewels on Dolly's dresser. So like extra suspicious, ooh, we are gonna be crawling out of here tonight. But Dolly wasn't budging an inch with what she was saying. She was in a happy marriage. The burglar came in, locked her in the closet, shot Fred, and left. Cops didn't believe it, but they couldn't prove anything otherwise. Well, then the crime lab report came back saying the gun that killed Fred was just an itty-bitty purse gun, not really something a burglar would use. More like something a lady like Dolly would carry in her clutch for protection, but didn't matter because they couldn't find a gun anywhere. And if Dolly had done it, how would she locked herself in the closet and then tossed the key several feet from the door? So with no real reason to keep Dolly at the station, they just let her go to continue their investigating. Well, then it came time to settle up Fred's estate and finances, and one of the lawyers was accepting her flirtatious come-ons. She even gave him a beautiful diamond-studded watch, which he immediately recognized, but she was like, oh, I ended up finding it by the lilies in the front yard. How about that? The burglar must have dropped it there. What a lucky girl I am, tee-hee. Lucky except my husband being dead, of course, I guess. And then a buddy of hers found out about Fred's death, and Dolly was like, I didn't do it, I promise, but if the cops see these little tiny guns, they'll pin the murder on me. And the friend was like, do you want me to dispose of them? And she's like, hell yeah, I'll even throw in a blowy. Somehow the investigator on Dolly's case learned about the diamond watch her lawyer was now wearing, but when Dolly was questioned about it, it was just the weirdest thing. She couldn't remember ever having seen it in her life. Imagine that, selective amnesia? Suspicious? Not to worry though, because the investigator skipped his little ass over to Milwaukee where Fred had purchased the watch. He got the receipt and serial number, which matched perfectly with the watch on the lawyer's wrist. Dolly's like, whoopsies, maybe it was mine. She's brought into jail and the media has a field day. Her buddy ends up reading about her arrest and immediately goes to the police to tell them about the guns Dolly had given him. But he's like, I threw him in the tar pit, sorry. Dolly didn't enjoy prison, I mean, who does? But Mama's gotta do her thing in there still. She arranged for Otto to have groceries delivered by her old lawyer, the one she gave the watch to and still had the hots for, which was a sweet gesture until Otto spilled his guts telling the lawyer everything about how they forked and spooned 3 times a day for the last freaking decade, not something that you tell the new boyfriend. And so the lawyer's like, grab your shit, you need to be out of this attic right the hell now. But the lawyer still really liked Dolly. He thought she was the sweetest thing since pecan pie. The trial goes on for months though, and the investigators end up finding the tar pit guns, but they were too rusty to be used as evidence. And then the fact that she allegedly had found the diamond watch in the bushes and re-gifted it, it made sense and really couldn't be used. So all charges were dropped and she was a free woman. Years go on, Otto ended up moving away and starting a new life, and after 7 or 8 years, Dolly and the lawyer's relationship kind of took a turn for the worst. They end up getting into a huge ass argument, so he goes to the police station to tattle on Otto and tell them everything Otto had said when he went to go deliver groceries to the attic almost a decade ago. The lawyer told them how Otto was basically a sex slave locked in the attic, and suddenly everything changed. This whole cold case made sense since the police hadn't checked the attic because why the fuck would they? They finally found their missing piece. So the cops arrest Otto and put him him on trial where pretty much everything gets laid out into the open. He was convicted of manslaughter, but he couldn't be jailed because it was now 1 year after the statute of limitations had expired. So like nothing happened. Otto ended up changing his name, he got married, he had kids, and Dolly lived till 1961. And that, my friends, is how to get away with murder. Isn't that just a crazy story though? What the hell? There are a lot of feelings, like I'm sad that Dolly married an asshole, but at the end of the day, she was kind of the asshole, right? Like she manipulated him into thinking he was crazy, so he had to be medicated. She definitely didn't help with his drinking habits. Her selfishness kind of got him killed. Yet there was no punishment. And nobody finds that weird? This is just a very odd case. Imagine your dog wakes you up in the middle of the night because it has to take a giant shit. Immediately, you regret giving it the leftover bean salad for dinner, but such is life when you decide a fur baby is your only child. The things we do for them. So you put on its pink diamond-studded leash, you head out your front door, and you walk past this beautiful big-ass Dutch colonial house. It's like 3:30 in the morning, the air is moist, but not unpleasant. There's still some TVs on in the windows, and this dog just happens to stop and squat at 112 Ocean Avenue, but there's something eerie about this house. It seems dead quiet, literally. While the dog is taking a liquid shit in the yard, this person's admiring the 3 stories of dark wood, the smell of old money with those 5 bedrooms, a pool, a boathouse, just sitting there on a canal in Amityville, Long Island. Long Islands. It looked like the kind of place where you might find a Kennedy strolling around or see a Real Housewife filming while holding a tiny designer dog. This big booty Judy of a house has those creepy-ass quarter moon windows on the top floor, but even in its beauty, it's still giving demonic house vibes. Well, the person with the dog goes back to their house for a late night quarter of a cheesecake. That's all they'll eat, damn it. But inside this creepy-ass house, 6 people are lying face down in their beds. They're not having a nice little siesta or some cute little slumber party in their pajamas with pillow fights. These people are dead. Shot, every single one of them. Mom, dad, 2 brothers, 2 sisters, just gone. The blood was now soaking through the mattress onto the floor below, and there had been no signs of a struggle. None of the neighbors heard a damn thing. There's no broken windows. Even the person walking their schnoodle, Cindy, had no idea what was going on inside that house. Little did anyone know that somewhere, skulking inside that house like the weird lisping 3-eyed stepson you keep in the attic, that skulker was the one person who survived. They were the eldest son, the black sheep, the one with a temper like a hornet with a heroin habit, and a closet full of guns with a daddy who beat his ass like a piñata. Well, just a few years ago, Amityville, Long Island was just a sleepy little waterfront village on the South Shore where rich bitches have boats and affairs, and it seemed like nobody really knew how to give a good perm, and everyone just ate casseroles for dinner. It's the kind of town where everybody went to church 3 times a week, mowed their lawns, and anything more than missionary was considered kinky. This was a Norman Rockwell painting with a splash of marinara sauce because half the town was Italian. And right there, down on Ocean Avenue, tucked against the Amityville River with its fancy swimming pool and a curving slide and a boathouse that 10 out of 10 definitely did not have gays cruising behind, well, there lived the DeFeo family. And from the outside, you would think these people are just lovely, charming, just the family that normal families want to be. We need to take a pre-suspicious shot for that, because it ain't true, mama. Ronald Sr., who everyone called Big Ronnie, he was this tall, broad Italian brick shithouse of a man who worked at his daddy-in-law's Buick dealership out in Brooklyn. The man knew how to dress. He was very clean-cut. He always drove sexy cars, and he had the kind of confidence that comes specifically from having a 9-incher with Coke can girth and marrying into money just to pretend it was all his own. We all know one of those. His wife, Louise, was on the quieter side, but she wasn't like a wet blanket or anything, and most definitely was not a pushover. She was a bit more humble because she was used to her family name opening doors and sometimes closing caskets. Because her father, Michael, had deep connections to the Genovese crime family. I mean, with a name like Big Ronnie, you know they're probably tapping toes with a few gunslingers, right? So this was just a heaping dish of suburbia with a side of coleslaw and organized crime. And then, of course, a sprinkling of holy water, because they also had a giant statue of St. Joseph holding baby cheeses in the lawn. But this family did really have money to burn. Big Ronnie even commissioned a giant-ass life-size portrait that cost around 50 grand and took over a year to complete. I just think that giant portrait on Schitt's Creek, which was like the only thing they ended up with. But behind that delightful pool and the oversized portrait and the pressed Armani suits, the house was a floral wallpaper-wrapped war zone. Big Ronnie's ass was volatile, and I'm not talking in like the Taco Bell shits kind of way. He was hot-tempered hard and kind of a controlling son of a bitch. He would hug you one second and then throw you against the wall the next. In fact, he was known to shove toddlers into walls. Which, yes, some of us have dreamed of, but I have self-restraint. This bitch, though, was yeeting his own son into the wall like a hacky sack, even though his head was still as soft as a warm dinner roll. Ronald Jr., aka Butch, got older and shit ended up getting worse. You know how highfalutin people do. They have really, really high expectations for their children, especially their firstborns. And poor Butch had met exactly none of the expectations that Big Ronnie had for him. I can relate to that. He was overweight as a kid, shy, brooding, the kind of kid who got bullied at school, then came home and got bullied by his own dad. So his parents were like, you know what, honey, pour me another drink and let's have a chat. You're not a complete lost cause, just most of one. Maybe we can get something from you. So we'll start by sending you to a psychiatrist. And then after like one session, they were like, you know what? Maybe not. It's just buy you stuff, which, as we all know, is always the most effective treatment for deep psychological trauma. Nothing heals generational trauma like a fresh new steaming pair of Louboutins, right? Well, Butch didn't really heal from anything. He was getting into even more fights at school, using drugs, heroin, LSD, the whole hippie pharmacy. And he'd regularly clash with his dad in screaming matches that the neighbors 10 doors down could hear. We won't lie, though. Those nosy-ass neighbors loved that shit. But I guess at one point during a very heated argument, Butch pointed a shotgun at his dad and pulled the trigger. Well, Big Ronnie better kiss his juicy tits and call them lucky because the gun just happened to malfunction and didn't go off. He's just standing there stunned and then just walked away as though his son didn't just try to splatter him across the dining room like a water balloon. And fucking hell, they had a reputation, damn it, so they didn't call the cops, didn't do anything about it. They just moved on like this was a spilled glass of Chianti at Sunday dinner. Whoopsie doopsie. One would think maybe, just maybe, that would be the moment someone in the household should have said, you know, we probably should have a family meeting and talk about this. You know, everyone can hold the share stick and get a turn to vent. But do you think that happened? No. So 1974 rolls around and Butch was now like 23, still living at home because why leave the palace even if it's dysfunctional? This shit's rent-free even if he could afford his own pad from working at his grandpa's car dealership with his daddy-o. He had somehow landed a girlfriend who actually reported his heroin use to the cops, which got him put on special narcotics probation. Sounds like a very happy, stable couple. And then just a couple weeks before shit hit the fan and everything leaned to the left, Butch pulled some fuckery that probably would have been funny had it not been so freaking stupid. The dealership was like, okay, Mr. Big Pants, you're gonna be a big boy today, okay? We're gonna give you $20,000 in cash to deposit at the bank. Can you do that, sweetie? And then after you've done that, we're gonna buy you a nice triple scoop ice cream cone, okay? Well, this ass fuck arranged a fake robbery with a friend so they could split the cash. I mean, 20 grand, why even bother? Although I guess at that point in time, 20 grand was like 100 grand. So that's a decent amount of money, but also, his family was rich as shit. So like, why? Just embezzle like a normal family. These theatrics are just extra. But his big plan was to pretend to get robbed on the way to the bank, which ended up being as convincing as Fat Benny from middle school saying he didn't eat the last donut when there was literally a powdered sugar ring on his chin and tits. Oh, Fat Benny, he's now a fitness trainer. Well, when the cops came to investigate, Butch just refused to cooperate. He was like, no, I'm not gonna say a thing. Do you know my daddy? Well, my daddy's gonna fuck you up real good, you fart face. Well, this led to Big Ronnie looking into how much of his daddy-in-law's money was evaporating, which was very suspicious. So he started screaming at his son some religious banter saying, oh, you've got the devil on your back, and Butch, being ever the gentleman, screamed right back, you fat prick, I'll kill you, which, I mean, he did. So, if anything, he was a man of his word. Anywho, it's November 13th, 1974, and it's just a normal night for the DeFeo family. Some of them are spackling on their Pond's cold cream, some of them are putting their hair in curlers, others are standing in front of the mirror wishing their mosquito bite boobies would just grow already. But none of them knew what was about to happen. There was Dawn, the eldest daughter, who was 18, Allison, who was 13, Mark was 12, little John Matthew was 9, and all of them were there in their bedrooms. They all hop into their squishy mattresses, say their prayers, and go to beddy bye. But not Butch. He stayed awake. He was laying in his bed going over the plan for the 900th time that day, waiting for just the right moment to strike. He looks at the clock. It's 1:30. No, that won't work because Mom and Dad might still be up taking the plastic sheet off the bed. So he went over his plan again. Next time he looked at the clock, it was 2:15. Not quite time yet. After all, little John Matthew had a wild imagination and was probably still up playing with his little green soldiers. So he started hyping himself up, saying, "Okay, it's almost time. We're gonna do this. We got this shit, man. Fuck yeah." He's pounding his chest like a football player in the locker room and starts breathing all heavy, getting them adrenaline juices bubbling. And when the clock struck 3 a.m., he pulled the covers off himself, stood up, rebuttoned his boxers, pulled up his .35 caliber lever-action rifle, one of the several guns he kept in his bedroom closet. 'Cause if you're gonna collect anything, it might as well be deadly weapons, right? He quietly opened up his door. After all, he didn't want to wake a single soul because they could run and ruin his entire operation. He goes down the hall to the first bedroom, moonlight pouring in dramatically through the hall windows. He puts his hand on the cold, heavy brass doorknob, twists it to open the door, and stands there staring at his two monsters. These two beasts who had raised him, given him everything he could possibly want, and maybe some things he didn't. He lifts his gun and shoots 2 shots right into his dad and then 2 shots into his mother. And this did something wild to him. It didn't snap him out of a craze where he'd fall to his knees sobbing from the aftermath. No, madam, the energy this gave him was euphoric. Why hadn't he done this before? Why the fuck did he wait so long? This was amazing. His heart was pumping. His chest was heaving. This felt as natural as a ballerina dancing. So he went to the next room, 1 shot for Mark, 1 shot for John, right in the back while they slept face down. Then the girls, Allison and Dawn. The whole thing took around 20 minutes and not a single person woke up. Which, I'm just seeing myself. This is totally lipstick. It's not meant to be blood, I promise. It's red because it shows up, you know? I'm also not the characters. I'm just somebody who had a bad night. Anywho, nobody screamed loud enough for the neighbors to hear, which, imagine having a house so big that you can shoot a rifle like 10 times and it doesn't even alarm anyone. But just like the plan in Butch's head, nobody got up. Nobody tried to flee. Nobody was hiding in a panic room or trying to get through a back staircase. Well, some people later speculated that maybe they were drugged. And Butch did later say in an interrogation that he did in fact drug their asses up, but there was never actually any evidence of any kind of sedative found. So maybe they were just really deep sleepers, or fear paralyzed them, or the shots happened so fast that they didn't have time to react. But everyone was in bed, so that's hella suspicious, right? After the murders, Butch kind of let his own euphoria settle down, and he didn't panic. He didn't cry or call 911. He didn't kneel and pray to that statue of St. Joseph on the lawn. No, he took a nice, hot, steamy shower, trimmed his nipple hair and his beard, because priorities. After all, he knew there was a chance he'd probably be pretty heavily photographed, and he had to look good. He changed his clothes, collected all of the spent shell casings in his blood-soaked clothing, took all that outside, and threw the rifle into the canal behind the house. Then he tossed his clothes and the casings into the storm drain while driving to Brooklyn. He was like, you know what? I feel so refreshed, I'm gonna go to work. So he went to the car dealership like it was a regular Wednesday. He probably sold a few Buicks. Then at 6:30 that evening, a full 15 plus hours after the murder, Butch was sitting in his car, cool as a crisp cucumber, and he's like, all right, well, let the show begin. All my years of watching Carol Burnett is finally paying off. So he starts working himself up, slapping his face, getting ready to put on an Oscar-worthy performance. He's heaving, trying to make himself look all mad and distraught. Then he gets out of his car and walks into Henry's bar in Amityville, looking convincingly like a man who just saw a ghost, and he starts screaming, you gotta help me, I think my mummy and daddy are shot. As if he didn't know damn well that they were in their bed, drained in their dainties. A group of his buddies are like, oh my god, what the fuck? And so they pile into his car and drive to 112 Ocean Avenue. One of them, his friend Joe, goes inside and immediately calls 911 because, shocker, there's dead people everywhere. The cops show up, they search the house, find all 6 bodies still in their beds, blood on the walls, the bodies so cold that they didn't even bother checking for pulses. And Butch is outside doing his fabulous little community theater production. The tears, the shock, the trembling hands, the gagging, falling to the ground, thrashing, pulling out chunks of his hair, wailing into the sky like Mel Gibson's freedom cry. He tells the cops, well, someone must have broken in. You know what, son of a bitch on a Triscuit, I bet you it was probably a hitman. And so he drops the name Lewis, who had indeed been connected to some shady shit, and this Butch bitch was trying to spin this whole mob assassination story, which could honestly be pretty plausible given his family's actual mob ties. However, there was one teeny tiny little problem. The fact that this story had more holes than a gay club's bathroom stall door. For one thing, when the cops searched the house, they found an empty gun box in Butch's room, which happened to be for a .35 caliber rifle that was suspiciously absent from his closet. Well, let's take a suspicious shot for that. Oh, I'm almost out. I'm glad I water these the fuck down, because otherwise you'd have to roll me out of here. And the timeline didn't really add up. The family was still in their jammies, which meant they were definitely killed at night, which also meant Butch was home, which meant his whole story where, oh, I was at work and came home to this, that shit was falling apart faster than a Swiss chocolate butt plug. So the cops are like, look, bro, you gotta come in for questioning, because everything here is just hella suspicious. That's my cue. And Butch was like, yeah, sure, no problem, in between his fake little tears. And he really doubled down on the whole mob hit story. He was like, oh, Lewis dragged me from room to room. He put a gun to my head. He is the real killer. And the detectives are sitting there like, okay, oh yeah, sure, sweetie. And this is before you went to work, freshly showered and trimmed and put in a full day's work? Okay, and tell me, what exactly did this guy look like? Where did he go afterward? Like, which door did he leave from so we can dust for fingerprints? And why did nobody in the neighborhood see a strange man leaving the house where 6 people just got murdered? Even Cindy walking her schnoodle didn't see anybody coming out, and her dining room window is looking right at your house. And we know for a fact she ate almost the entire cheesecake that night, so her ass was sitting there for a while. And then Butch's story just collapsed like a house made of wet Oreos. It really didn't take long. Butch broke and confessed to everything. He told cops where he threw the rifle, where he stashed the evidence, how the timeline went. And he said, quote, once I started, I just couldn't stop, which is something someone like Cindy would say about eating cheesecake. That line should not apply when you start murdering people. So he was arrested, and police recovered the rifle exactly where he said it was. They matched the bullet fragments from the victims, and game over, case closed. Or at least it should have been, but as you can see on the little scrolly thing on the bottom of your screen, there's more to this story. This shit was about to get super freaking messy. So Butch's defense attorney, William, decides to go the simple route, just a mere insanity defense. And Butch, who I don't think was really cued in on all the plans, just gets up on the stand and says, you know what? I killed them all in self-defense. Which, like, what the fuck? Self-defense against 6 sleeping people in their pajamas, including a 9-year-old? What, was little John Matthew coming at you with a teddy bear and a juice box? We'll take a stupid shot for that one. Although maybe the whole insanity thing was the best idea after all, because he also testified saying, I am God. Which made the jury very uncomfortable and got them thinking, okay, is this dude crazy or just an asshat? And they collectively decided, just an asshat. The defense ended up bringing in a psychiatrist named Daniel, who argued very strongly that Butch was indeed very mentally ill, like not just a touch. This dude was a full-blown psychopath. The prosecution countered with another doctor who said, yeah, sure, the kid used heroin and LSD and had antisocial personality disorder, but he knew what he was doing. He understood right from wrong, and he chose wrong enthusiastically, in fact. The trial lasted a grueling 6 weeks, and the jury ended up finding Ronald Jr. guilty of all 6 counts of second-degree murder. And the judge, who hadn't seen any shit like this in all his years, was like, fuck you, you little punk, you're getting 6 terms of 25 to life. So this little bitch was never getting out. And once again, that should be the end, right? Gavel drops, bad guy goes to prison, justice served with a side of garlic knots. But honey, no, because this man spent the next 45 years in prison telling a completely different version of the story anytime someone stuck a microphone in his face. And the buttfuck literally sounded crazy. It's like he was smoking some off-brand prison salts and downing toilet wine. Almost 10 years after his conviction, he told Newsday that his sister Dawn killed their father, and then their distraught mother killed the rest of the siblings, and then he killed his mom. Then in a later version, he said Dawn and his 2 friends helped him do it. Then in another version, he claimed he was married at the time to a woman named Geraldine, and he was actually living in New Jersey, and he had only driven to Amityville because his mom called him to break up a fight. Well, the cops tracked down Geraldine, and she admitted under oath that that was bullshit. The marriage didn't even happen until 1989, 15 years after the murders. And I guess he was like, yeah, well, so-and-so can attest to my story. And so they looked for this old so-and-so he said was the witness to this latest alibi, and this person was completely made up. They just didn't even exist. The judge, who is now very gray because of this trial, was just done with this man's bullshit. And so in 1993, a judge said, you know what? Everything this guy says is absolute hole-poking malarkey. We can't trust you. You're a fucking liar. And so every appeal failed, and the evidence that could have gotten him out was just too degraded to test. But in reality, even if they could have tested it, the court said it wouldn't have changed the outcome. He dug this giant hole with all his lies, and now he'd have to bury himself in it. Even in 2003, he alleged that his lawyer sucked, so he appealed, and it was denied. He ended up dying in custody in March of 2021 at the age of 69, and the cause of death was never publicly released. But we have to talk about the part that most of us know about, the haunting. So, a couple years after the murders, this couple named George and Kathy Lutz bought the house at 112 Ocean Avenue for $80 grand, which even in 1975 was a fucking bargain and a half. You kidding me? For a 5-bedroom waterfront property with a pool? Like, get out of here. Sign me the fuck up. Me and them ghosties will be partying all night long. Damn. Of course, the bargain came with a slight, teeny tiny little catch, just the fact that 6 people had been violently murdered in it a little over a year ago, and all of the DeFeo family furniture was still inside, which the Lutzes happily bought for an extra $400 as part of their mortgage deal. It's not creepy. So, they're literally sleeping in the beds where people died, eating at the table where the family had their last supper, sitting on the couches that had absorbed the psychic residue of a mass murder. Which I love a good deal as much as the next bitch, but maybe not that much. Well, creepy shit started happening. The first few days were completely normal. Kathy was gassy from George's famous cabbage. George had sore feet because his shoes needed new insoles. It was just an average few days, that is, until the flies started swarming. They'd be trimming the shrubs out front and it was like a cartoon swarm of flies would just attack them. So they stopped wearing their new Chanel cologne because maybe it was the fragrance they were attracted to. But no, in fact, now they were finding flies inside too. And so they were both like, you know what? We got this bitch for $80,000. We can afford an exterminator. It's really the least of our problems. All the pipes are good and we've got a great water heater. So it's a little bug spray. But then they'd go and open the blinds for the day, going room to room, and they'd notice that the walls seemed to be sweating. And it's not like it was excessively moist in there. They had the air conditioning running. But then when they looked a little closer, this wasn't normal condensation. This was green ooze just leaking out of the walls like teenage pores. I just picture when you go into like a heavy smoker's house and you can see all the tar dripping from the walls. That's what I imagine, but I don't know. And if that wasn't annoying enough, George would wake up every freaking night at 3:15 on the clock, which was supposedly the exact same time as the DeFeo murders. There were cloven hoof prints out in the snow, which unless a horse was walking around on 2 feet, they had no idea where the fuck those came from. Apparently, George woke up to Kathy levitating off the bed one night and he had to pull her back down like a kite at the beach. Some demonic oinker named Jody would peer through their windows and they were like, why is there a pig looking in at us? Put your tits away, Kathy, the oinker's back. Needless to say, the Lutzes lasted exactly 28 days before fleeing the house, claiming they'd been terrorized by paranormal phenomena. Well, who the fuck wouldn't that affect, right? I've watched Ghost Hunters, that shit's scary. And the story blew the fuck up. It got turned into a book in 1977, famously the Amityville Horror, which sold over 6 million copies. And then a few years later, the movie was one of the biggest box office hits of the summer. And then came the sequels and the remakes and the documentaries and the podcasts and the Reddit threads and the TikToks. And before you know it, the haunted house was more famous than the actual murders. Which, I'll be real with you, I didn't even know about the murders. I just knew about the haunting. But here's the part that kind of bums me out because I do love paranormal shit. But apparently the attorney that represented Butch at the trial told People magazine that he and the Lutzes had created this entire story over several bottles of wine. So this lawyer and a couple of broke homeowners had some Chardonnay and fabricated a supernatural blockbuster, which, in their defense, it's actually kind of fucking genius. Look at how it changed movie history and all the lives that were changed because of this story. You've got the actors, the film crews, the podcasts, the books, just from a single fabricated story. Even if it was all fake, it was still historic. A judge later said the book appeared to be, quote, to a large extent a work of fiction. And then later owners of the house reported literally zero paranormal problems. They were pretty much pissed off at the boatloads of tourists who kept showing up to gawk at their living room like some fucked up theme park. They changed the house's address, replaced those creepy ass half-moon demon eye windows at the top of the house. They filled in the pool and pretty much tried to make the place completely unrecognizable, which, if you Google Earth it, the current address is 108 Ocean Avenue, and people who live there just want to be left the hell alone, I say as I tell you the address. But I get it, they now have this beautiful, gorgeous, stunning house, and they just want some peace and quiet. Who can blame them? But the murders, those were definitely real. The conviction was airtight. The haunting may be wine-soaked fiction, and Ronald Jr. changed his story so many times over the decades that by the end, he probably couldn't even remember what the actual fuck happened. Was it about money? I mean, after all, he did have that whole fake-ass bank robbery incident, and the insurance policies that he would have collected on his entire dead family would have been around $200,000, which now would be over $1.5 million. Or maybe it wasn't even about money at all. Maybe it was about the abuse, the decades of being beaten and belittled by a father who expected perfection and delivered violence. I think it was that one. There's also a good chance that maybe it was all the drugs that fried his brain like chicken and tallow. I'm sure they certainly didn't help. Or it could have just been pure rage that had been bubbling in him since he was a chubby little terrified toddler being thrown against walls. And we'll probably never know because the courts never really pinned down one single motive. They just had to prove that he did it, which they did, and everything else is just murky pea soup that we stir around and add a few things to every time we tell the story. And a wild story it is indeed, right? You know what? Tonight I'm totally gonna pop some popcorn and snuggle up to the NADIVEVO movie. And I can wear this bathrobe. But isn't that all just so fucking crazy? I have to Google the inside of the house. Oh, that's pretty. I don't think these pictures have been updated in a while because that is a blast from the past right there. Wow, I could fuck with that. So who was this Danny fella? Well, he was born in 1970 in Massachusetts. Even though he arrived into a time of love, doves, beads, bells, and pot brownies, he wasn't as excited about life as people were about the recently invented floppy disk. In fact, he was a jailhouse regular since a very young age. Like, I don't know if he had prison tattoos, but his name was definitely known by all the guards because he was in and out so much. But with him being a minor, details of the smaller crimes were kept from the public, but we do know that outside of jail, Danny had a fucked up life. Like, poor Danny had psychological and sexual abuse coming at him left and right like fucking dodgeball from almost every adult that was in his life, which, as you could imagine, really fucked him up. Like, all of the people that you should be able to look up to and should be protecting you end up abusing you and treating you like garbage? How could you not be a little more than twisted from that? And this abuse wasn't just a one-time thing, it was on a regular basis. It's like Danny's dad would pick a daily punishment out of a hat and he would almost find enjoyment picking new ways to abuse him. And it was said that his dad was also one of the adults that sexually assaulted him regularly. So this kid was like seriously messed up. He was labeled the creepy weird kid and was bullied and had no friends. Like, kids can be so cruel. This is why we are nice to people, man. Like, you never know what the fuck people have going on and just a simple smile can change their entire life. Anyways, Danny began going weeks, maybe even months without showering, and he'd start to smell like a moldy tuna patty, which of course made him an even bigger target at school. I'm not sure though if maybe he'd stop showering so that his dad wouldn't sexually abuse him, but if so, how fucking sad. And then Danny was also dyslexic and wasn't receiving the help he needed, so he just started shutting down. Like, he was really up against a wall. No, but seriously, by high school, he just stopped giving a fuck about his hygiene altogether. He didn't care about his appearance. Any reason to live or to better himself totally went out the window. And I'm pretty sure he was borderline suicidal from a very young age. Which, I know he turned out to be a killer, but it seems like with more than half of these cases we've done, a killer's childhood directly affected their need to kill and could have easily been avoided with better parenting. Like, why did these shitty-ass people have to abuse him? Why did the classmates mentally and verbally torture him like the adults? This was just kind of like the Maribel case we did a few stories back. This was all a recipe for creating a killer. Anyways, teachers at school really can tell that he has some shit going on, so he's finally referred to the school psychologist to try and get some help. And this should have been where the story ends and we can leave on a happy note and he lives in a rose garden among monks. But we are here today, which means that's not how it happened. The psychiatrist ended up diagnosing Danny with hyperactivity disorder, which it was like, fuck, let's add this to the already spiraling mental case from the abuse at home and from classmates. But the psychiatrist was like, honey, let me help you. And Danny was like, okay, yay. Until eventually the psychiatrist was like, let me help you. And so for an entire freaking year, the psychiatrist sexually abused Danny during every single session. Why the fuck is this kid like an abuse magnet? Like, he was abused at home, at school, at therapy. There wasn't a single safe place for him. He wasn't the leader in anything. He really didn't have anything to look forward to or that gave him thrills. So one day in his early teens, he was walking in a store and took something. Just took it. And honey, did this give him a thrill. This was better than sneaking into the dirty mag section at Pete's Petrol Palace. Oh, and the best part about this was that he was in control. He could decide what to steal, where to put it, and what to do with it, and nobody knew. Well, then stealing Butterfingers from the gas station turned into stealing socks from the mall, which then turned into stealing records from the music store, and soon he was like, I'm getting pretty good at this shit. I need more. Well, you've heard of the home buying bug? Well, by 15, he had the home invasion persuasion. He thought, yeah, this is cool if I break into people's houses. Oh, it's so fetch. But simply taking someone's valuables, that wasn't enough because it might take them ages to even realize their shit's gone. And to rough the whole house up and make it obvious that there had been a break-in, well, that just seemed like too much work and probably increased the chances of getting caught. So after Danny would pocket a few goods, he'd ever so slightly move things around the home so that it was kind of clear that someone had been there, but not immediately obvious. Like if you went to go clean the toilet, the scrub brush would have been moved from underneath the bathroom sink into the master closet, or you go to pull out your vibrator and it's stuck tip first in the Jiffy jar. Honey, we've been there more than twice. Well, eventually it just got to the point where he wasn't even invading homes to steal shit. He was just doing it to fuck with people and play mind games on them, which is obviously terrible, and we should not condone that and totally should not do. But at the same time, it's slightly darkly comical, not like haha comical. It's kind of like a big fuck you to a world that's royally screwed him over his entire damn life. Well, flash forward to 1986, Danny had a sweet 16, and this was the year that set into motion a series of very unfortunate events that he'd forever be famous for. Choices matter, people, and this is a great example. Danny somehow got the number of a local family. People aren't certain if he broke into the house at some point, and that's when he got their phone number. But regardless, this home had 3 people, a dad and his 2 daughters. The daughters were Tina, who is 15, and Karen, who is 9. Danny calls the house and is like, hi, are Tina and Karen home? The dad's like, who the fuck is this? Why are you calling my daughters, you creep? And Danny's like, well, calm your tits, daddy-o. I go to the same school as Tina, and I got this number from a mutual friend. And the dad was like, oh, okay, I'm sorry. A lion's gotta protect his cubs. Danny ends up telling the girls that he was a good-looking, athletic blonde and was very well educated, and he lived in the area. Tina, who is starting to become a little bit boy crazy, was like, can we get a catfishing shot? Because this is already very suspicious. Well, Tina, with her hormones just running rampant, began talking to Danny on the regs. Then they were talking nightly, and then before anyone knew it, they were like, hey, you want to go on a date? Of course, Tina wouldn't say no to a handsome blonde boy who seemed to have his shit together and was quite the conversationalist. So Danny arrives on her doorstep the evening of the date, and surely you can imagine Tina's shock when she sees who she's talking to. Blonde hair? I think the fuck not. Cutie with the jock's booty? Hell to the no. In fact, this dark-haired, dirty, greasy little boy had literally no attractive features to Tina whatsoever. But her dad raised her to never judge a book by its cover, so she let him take her to the town fair. However, about an hour into the date, she realized that maybe she didn't want to read Danny's book and had been very much accurately judging him. So she excused herself from the date and went home. My kind of girl, just do your thing, honey. I honestly think that Danny could have had a chance with her because Tina seemed lovely. Danny probably was a very interesting person through all the walls that he'd built up. But what creeped her the hell out was when they were standing in line at the Ferris wheel and Danny learned that Tina and Karen's mom had recently died of cancer. Instead of being like, oh my gosh, holy shit, I am so sorry, let's ride this ride, you can cry on my shoulder. No, he was not a smooth operator. He was like, oh, tell me more about your mom's death. Like, how did you feel the moment she died? How much did your mom suffer? What did her dying body look like? Like, he was obsessed with her mom's death and wouldn't stop asking Tina questions about it for the entire date. Like, honey, I know you're awkward, but fuck, read the damn room. Obviously not a cute look, and we clearly understand why Tina only gave the date an hour, poor girl. As one could assume, she said no to a second date, but little did she know that she'd see Danny yet again, but in a much different circumstance, but more on that later. So time moves on, and one night, Tina and Karen are really missing their mother, so they think, hey, what if we try to contact mom through a seance? Seance? Beyonce? Which I think we can all agree that would have been everyone's first choice. We all would have done the same. But they really didn't take it seriously. They were young, they were naive, and I'm not quite certain why they even did the seance if they didn't think anything would happen. I guess just for fun. Well, these little ladies all but shit themselves when they began their ritual in the basement, and shortly into their chanting, they could feel the hair on the backs of their necks stand up. It was almost like someone was watching them. But there were no voices that came to them, no signs of their mom, just an eerie eerie feeling like something in the darkness was peering at their every freaking move. They gave up with their chance, they called it a night, headed upstairs, grabbed a snack, and then went to bed. However, shortly into their sleep, the girls were awoken by a rhythmic pounding. Tina's like, Dad, did you bring the neighbor home again to practice adult wrestling? But no, Pops was dead ass asleep. So they creep back into their bedroom and once more a rhythmic knocking begins. Holy shit, they think this is wonderful. This must be Mom communicating with us from the other side. They start asking the spirit questions, to which it would reply with knocks against the wall. How exciting, they uncovered a supernatural barrier that they'd be able to talk to their mom through. This continued for many days, but the knocking became so frequent that it started waking them up in the night, and then it started keeping them up. Like, Mom, seriously, let me sleep. God damn. Can't we do this after like 9 a.m.? But then slowly items around the house started to disappear. Not like a washing machine or anything, but like things would be on the table one day and then they'd be strewn across the floor the next. Or the family would come home from an outing and they'd find the living room furniture would be on this side of the room instead of that side. Or a bedroom would be totally rearranged, not even with good feng shui either. The nerve. So now the girls are like, well, fuck a duck. Maybe we opened this portal and this isn't Mom. Like maybe this is a demon and we're being haunted. Ew. The dad was like, screw all of this. I know it's you two who are doing this. But they denied it and they were like, I'm pretty sure we just let a vengeful ghost into our house. But Frank, that's the dad's name, he was like, you know what? This is just emotional trauma from the death of your mother. That's right. In his eyes, these girls were being absurd. Like, how could a ghost move shit? And if they can certainly pick up a vacuum and help clean around the house, damn it. Well, the trees change color, some snowflakes fall, and before we know it, January of 87 rolls around, and the girls are sitting all alone in their front room when the knocking picks up again. At this point, the tapping had become so frequent that it was driving the girls absolutely batshit crazy. And to piss them off even more, it only happened when they were alone or when their dad was out of earshot. This time though, rather than the noise coming from the walls, the tapping seemed to be coming from the basement. Suspicious shot, anyone? This is always how scary movies starts. Like, why does shit have to happen in creepy ass basements? And just like in every scary movie, the girls go towards the sound. Real smart, ladies. Real freaking smart. We would all do it though. But they actually were on top of their shit. Like, they grabbed a couple kitchen knives before they headed to the basement door, and they opened it up fully expecting to see a demon standing there ready to drag them to hell, but there was nothing. So they turn the stairwell light on, begin their ascent, and follow the tapping noises. Ugh. They slowly reached the room beneath the home and instantly regretted ever doing the seance. Because written on the walls in blood was the message, I'm in your room, come find me. Ugh. Suspicious. The girls looked at each other, looked back at the message, and then ran upstairs screaming their heads off. They flew out the front door and waited in the driveway till Frank came home. And the moment he arrived, the girls were sputtering and stuttering about a message written in blood on the basement walls. And while these little ladies were blubbering on, he's just like, poor dears, they really aren't handling their mom's death very well. Once again, Frank was certain that the girls had written the message, and not only did he make the girls clean the mess up, he ordered the girls to undergo grief counseling, which probably wasn't a bad idea, honestly. A few weeks go by, and at this point, the tapping had kind of stopped, so it was a nice break for the girls. They'd finally be able to get some sleep. So the therapist tries to work with them until eventually they think, you know, maybe this actually was in our heads. Not quite sure how both sisters would experience the same hallucination, but sure, Jan, whatever you say. So they block the fact that their house could be haunted and put that way in the back of their little minds. A few weeks go by and Frank is happier than a purebred poodle on a pool noodle, knowing that his therapy plan, it worked. All the tapping stories seemed to have stopped. Life was swell. Until one day when the girls are home alone, of course, sitting in the living room, and they start to hear a faint tapping. It wasn't coming from the basement nor the living room wall. They got up and headed to the kitchen, but the tapping seemed to fade the closer they got to it. It wasn't coming from there. Maybe the den? Nope. So they walked down the hallway towards the bedrooms. They could kind of hear it in their dad's room, but the moment they stepped inside of Tina's room, they could instantly tell that there was a spirit on the other side of the wall. And if that wasn't creepy enough to make your dick curl, once again there was a message written in blood on the wall. It's a good thing it was wallpaper. It's very easy to clean. This time the message said, I'm back, come and find me. Creepy shot because again, what the hell? Just like before, the girls end up doing a Scooby-Doo style exit, scrambling in midair, flying to the door. They run to the neighbor's house and are like, there's a goddamn demon in our house. The neighbor's like, what, a squirrel? No, an actual factual demon. And this neighbor knew about the loss of their mother, and they also knew that these girls weren't taking it too well, so they were like, oh okay, sweetie, let's go over and have a little look. Condescending much? The neighbor walks in, everything is normal, nothing's out of place. They're like, see, this house is fine. But the girls are like, no, Nancy, go to the bedroom. So Nancy, who I actually don't know if her name was in fact Nancy, she just seemed like a Nancy. But anyways, while Nancy's standing there, she starts to hear little taps too. She looks to make sure that both girls are still standing next to her, not off playing mind games. But Tina and Karen are both right here giving her the I told you so bitch kind of look. Nancy slowly creeps down the hallway towards Tina's bedroom, and she's not sure if at this point she should shit from fear or laugh from a practical joke. And the tapping's getting louder the closer they get to the bedroom, and as they turn in, there in big bloody letters is the same message that Tina said there would be. So they all run back to Nancy's house to call Frank, but once again he's like, this is the girl's doing, don't be fooled. He said, is anything out of place? And they're like, well, no. He says, are there signs of a break-in or anything? And they tell him, no, there's just this big-ass message written in blood all over the wall, but it's probably nothing. Frank said, stay the hell right there, I'm coming home. And he sped off in his car just furious that he'd spent thousands of dollars in therapy that didn't seem to have done anything. He pulls in his driveway, smoke coming out of his ears because he's fuming. And he's like, we're gonna end this bullfuckery right here, right now. He unlocked the door, he marched into his house with Nancy, Tina, and Karen, and he was immediately put off. When the ladies had left, everything had been pristine. Now, in just the time it took Nancy to call Frank and for Frank to drive home, the place was in complete shambles. It was like a tornado had come and swept through their home. Can we get another suspicious shot for that? Oh, this is just creepy. At this point, the sun had pretty much set and it was getting dark out, of course. Frank moseys down the hallway towards his daughter's moonlit room and wasn't at all surprised to see the same kind of message that had been in the basement. He was like, oh, look, that. Except now the words, marry me, had been added below the first message. Frank gives a huge eye roll, and as he turns to tell his daughters off, he stops because he sees something in the corner of the room. Frank's balls replace his Adam's apple, and he starts screaming because there, standing across the room, was a young man. He was wearing a full face of makeup, Frank's deceased wife's dress, a blonde wig, and was carrying a hatchet. Who might this young man be? You guessed it, Jack Nicholson. It was Danny. Frank lunged towards Danny and they were entangled in a struggle for a minute until all of a sudden Danny just disappeared from sight. Poof, gone faster than a gay with commitment issues. The police were called and they began testing the blood that was on the wall, only to find that this message wasn't written in blood. It was written in everyone's favorite tomato-based condiment, ketchup. But then they were like, how in the fuck did Danny get inside the house in the first place and escape so quickly? Somebody's been playing with her magic kit. So police search every nook and cranny of this house, eventually finding a small door behind a built-in cupboard that led into Tina's room. When officers opened it, they found a hole big enough to somewhat comfortably hold a person. They shine a light inside and there was Danny curled up like a baby skunk dressed like the corpse of the girl's mom. The officers shout at Danny and tell him to put his hands up, but he wouldn't, so the officer ended up holding a gun to Danny's head, telling him to get the fuck out of the hole. Get out of the hole! And this is when the cops knew Danny was in a really bad place because even with a gun held to his head, he looked excited. He wasn't scared at all to have a gun inches from his brain, like this was almost riveting to him. Well, apparently Danny had been pretending to be the ghost of Tina and Karen's mom to torment them, and today was the day he was finally gonna reveal himself dressed as their dead mother. Nobody really knew if it was for his own entertainment or if he genuinely wanted to scare the living shit out of the girls, but the fact that he had a hatchet probably doesn't mean that it would have ended too well, especially looking back at this and knowing what he'd do in the future. The police finally haul Danny out of the hole and then crawl in themselves. There's a tea kettle, some scones, a miniature TV. Honey, this was the Ritz. No, not really, but inside this hole were man-made tunnels all throughout the house, from the basement to the bedrooms to the living room and even inside the kitchen. And all of the rooms had little tiny peepholes so that Danny could spy on everyone at any time and make sure that Frank was gone when he'd start the tapping. What the actual fuck? And so he's caught. You'd think this is the end of the story, right? Of course it's not over because this is a murder mystery. Where the fuck's the murder? Oh, well, hold your titty berries because this is going to be sad and gruesome. Immediately after Danny was caught in the hole, he was placed in a juvie facility for an entire year. And because he was underage, we really don't know how his experience behind bars was, if he was rehabilitated, if he felt bad, if his mentality got even worse. But because we know how this story's gonna end, I think it's safe to say that he probably got worse, like much worse. The moment Danny was released from juvie, he went right back to his old life of burglary. He didn't think anyone would want to hire him, and he has to eat, so he decided to steal from people in the community. And during one of his break-ins, Danny stole 2 guns from the neighbor like 2 doors down. He was really playing it wild and seemed to only be breaking into people's homes around the neighborhood, which nobody said he was a smart cookie. And then like a half a mile down the road from his own family's house, Danny broke into the Gustafson home. And this was the second time he'd broken in there. The first time he'd stolen some items, and now foolishly he came back with guns. He was greeted by Priscilla, who was 33. She was pregnant. She had 2 young children, Abigail and William. Danny really hadn't planned on anyone being home, so his first reaction was to bolt out the window, but he panicked and ended up dragging Priscilla upstairs and tying her to the bed. Again, people, choices. We can always make better ones. Because now it seemed as though Danny had gone from just a creeper to a full-on savage animal. Andrew, her husband, had been at work when Danny broke in, and when he came home, he was met with the most horrific sight he ever could have encountered. He discovered his wife lying face down on the bed, which was now soaked in blood with splatters on the pillows and walls. Danny had sexually assaulted Priscilla, then shot her point blank multiple times in the head. Andrew ran out of the room and immediately called the police before collapsing outside. And when the cops arrived, they pulled back the shower curtain, hoping that maybe the kids were hiding behind it, and discovered the body of William, who had been drowned in the upstairs tub. Then they found Abigail, who seems to have been seen by Danny on his way out, and then he drowned her in the downstairs tub. And then Danny went straight from there to his niece's birthday party as if nothing had happened. Even the guests at the party would later say they had no idea Danny had done anything because he was acting perfectly normal. Can we get a what the actual fuck shot? Investigators immediately thought, well, this must be Danny. After all, he had been a bad seed in the neighborhood, what with his frequent run-ins with the law. In fact, moments after the cops were called and the media arrived, the first person interviewed for TV said, "I wonder what Danny's up to lately." Who needs DNA when you leave a trail like what he left? And what if his break-in into Tina and Karen's house with the axe had just been practiced for something like this? Of course, Danny knew his name would be brought up, so he fled the area. He jogged to a nearby town, broke into a woman's house, kidnapped her in her car, and then drove off. Choices. And oddly enough, they actually drove straight past the searching officers. The kidnapped woman ended up doing a tuck and roll near a stop sign, and while he was stopped, someone who had seen a picture of Danny on the news recognized him and alerted the police. And just 48 hours after the search for him began, he was found hiding behind a dumpster, of all places. And he was totally defensive. He was like, "What the fuck do you want? I'm innocent. I live here." Innocent my left foot. Well, actually, his left foot. His left sock, to be specific. Because there, embedded in his sock fibers, was a hair from Abigail, which set into stone his involvement in the family's murder. A year after that, for the murders, he was sentenced to 3 life sentences. And allegedly, since being in prison, he really hasn't shown any remorse for his actions. I guess it's clear that he does have some kind of personality disorders, and then finally in 2017 he broke and came to terms with his actions, just profusely apologizing to everyone involved. But was it a real apology, or was it just words from someone who simply wanted to get out of prison? His appeals have all been denied, so I guess we'll never know. On December 26th of 1973, the day after Christmas, people line up for blocks waiting for the highly anticipated movie, The Exorcist. People had no idea what the fuck they were in for. Like, this movie was unlike anything any of these people in line had ever seen before. People even left in the first half of the movie because they were too scared to finish it. In fact, some people were actually passing out from fear within the first half an hour of the movie. Some even fainted within like the first 10 minutes, and one lady, when she fainted, she broke her jaw going down and sued Universal. Like, this movie was revolutionary in the scare game. Now, with today's technology, it's just small cookies, but then if you weren't used to like horrific images, this shit could fuck you up. And what's even scarier is that it's kind of based on true events. I'm not saying everything in The Exorcist happened. We all know how Hollywood is. Sweet Holly and her wood is literally the most dramatic gal ever. Anytime Hollywood can add a little bit of juice for effect, you can bet your salty nips that juice couple runneth over. Quick recap though, if you've never seen The Exorcist, it's pretty much about a young girl who becomes violently possessed by a demon, and the young girl then has to be exorcised, not exorcised like crunches and thirsty mirror pics at the gym, but exorcised as in getting the demon out of her body. The little girl's head spins around, her voice gets fucked up, her eyes turn milky, it's some weird ass shit. By the end of the video, she literally looks like this. And not that this really has anything to do with today's story, but this film is actually one of several cursed films, meaning the cast and crew who are filming this video had several deaths and near fatal incidents happen during filming and right after, after filming. Like, that shit is freaky, and I think we have our very first suspicious shot before the story even freaking starts. Anyways, this story really plays at one of people's biggest fear, not fear of heights, but actually of the devil. This could be real, this could be fiction. I wasn't there, so who knows? But regardless, this is a scary ass story. I'm just here to dress up and tell you a tale based on what I've watched and what I've researched. With that being said, several people who have witnessed much scarier things than I ever have will tell you that something kind of like what you see on The Exorcist actually does happen when people are possessed, albeit much more tame. Heads going in weird direction, crawling on the ground like spiders, weird voices coming out of people that isn't their voice. A lot of people have even reported levitation, so like some weird freaky shit can happen, I guess. And way back in the 70s, after The Exorcist was launched, the Catholic Church saw a huge spike in people who claimed they needed an exorcism performed on them. I have a few family members that I think could probably use that, but we won't touch that today. It literally became so popular to be exorcised that there was actually a waiting list. It was like when Farrah Fawcett had that one hairdo and suddenly everyone wanted it, except with a demon. However, for a lot of people, it actually seemed like this wasn't a fad. Priests were reporting eyes rolling in the back of people's heads, foaming at the mouth, sudden convulsions, and like we said earlier, with a few cases, levitation. Well, the author of The Exorcist loosely based his version not off of a young girl, which was pictured in the films, but after a young boy. The boy's name was Roland Doe, who the author actually heard about while attending Georgetown. He was an English major at the time, and one of the Jesuits approached him and told him about Roland. That particular person seemed to have a lot of information that most of the public didn't, from one-on-one interviews to documents, and it gave the author enough information to kind of form a story. However, the movie and the book really only covered a fraction of what actually happened. Apparently, there was a secret diary kept from over 70 years ago that documented almost everything. So let's take it back to Maryland in 1949. Roland Doe is a pretty happy boy. He's an only child and he lives with his parents in Cottage City, a little burb right outside of DC. At school, Roland wasn't a bad student. He was just very, very hyperactive. He just had a lot of trouble focusing, which kind of landed him in quite a few sticky situations. And he did have friends at school. They were fine, but he wanted somebody he could really connect with, which turned out to be his Aunt Tilly. Tilly was a wild one. She sounded fun. She dabbled in psychic readings and tarot cards, and she loved to talk to the dead. In fact, one of her favorite things was to use her Ouija board. Ooh, have you ever heard of those? She was really into talking with people who have passed over, and she kind of introduced that to Roland too, and he found himself pretty equally as interested. So they would hang out and play with the spirit board, which is basically like a game board that has an alphabet on there, yes, no, and some numbers. Any amount of people can play, but whoever is playing has to put their hand on this little glass piece that kind of hovers over the board, and if a spirit wants to communicate, it'll move everyone's hand in the direction of letters, and it'll spell things out. If I played, mine would probably spell out cheap ass or something. But no matter what you believe, like, in all honesty, these boards are not for the faint of heart. Like, I even have family who is fucked up from playing with one years ago. Shit can happen, honey. Like, no ma'am. But Roland and his aunt had thought this board was just interesting. They had no idea the kind of fuckery that they were in for. But basically, a lot of people view these boards as invitations for spirits, dead people, demons, whatever, to cross into our world. And most people involved with Roland's case believe that that's where all the shit started. Get ready, folks. Not long after Roland and his aunt used this board, his mom starts hearing weird noises around the house. It was almost like something with claws was just inside the wall, slowly scratching down. Roland's dad did what probably anyone would do and instantly called the exterminator. He thought it was rats or a possum or something. But the exterminator came, saw nothing, and they left, so the parents thought that, well, Roland, being the prankster that he is, must just be playing a little joke on us. I guess Roland was kind of known to act out of order, so they thought this is just a phase, he'll grow out of it, and they ignored the sounds. As time moved on, though, the noises didn't really stop, and Roland's mother was starting to get very suspicious. She was like, fuck, I think my house might be haunted. Suspicious shot for you, mama, because that shit is scary as hell. 11 days after the scratching begins, Roland and his family gets completely life-altering news that totally crushes Roland. His Aunt Tilly, who shared the passion of the Ouija board with him, had abruptly died. This was Roland's favorite aunt, his only real friend. And he felt so broken down, so defeated, and he became very vulnerable. And soon after Tilly's death, Roland and his mother start hearing different sounds than just the scratching. And this wasn't in anybody's head either. Like, Roland and his mother were hearing the exact same thing, what sounded like a bunch of people marching in unison towards Roland's room. And they're freaking the fuck out because as the steps are drawing closer, the walls are shaking and the whole house feels like it's moving. And through all this tumultuous noise, Roland's mom yells out and says, "Tilly, if this is you, send us a message, knock 3 times. And suddenly all of the noise stops. And do you know what they heard? And so they think, whew, okay, this isn't dangerous. This is just Aunt Tilly doing her thing, trying to communicate with us from the other side. And so they let their guards down a bit. But if these knocks were truly coming from sweet Aunt Tilly, why would she be taunting them with all these loud noises? Maybe, just maybe, he attracted something else. Oh, hold on. Meh. Well, time moves on, but these weird incidents keep happening. Cupboards would randomly open, dishes would move around, the table would rumble, chairs would spin or just slide across the room. And this was happening almost every night after Roland would go to bed. In my mind, I picture this comical scene where a piece of toast flies across the room, someone catches it for breakfast, maybe a saucer and a cup of coffee along with it, you know, making the demon work for you. But sadly, that wasn't the case. Like, for a moment, shit would be peaceful when they turned out the lights at night, and then all of a sudden the bed would start shaking and shit would start moving. And then as the night carried on, it would progressively get worse. This tiny 13-year-old boy would be sitting in the middle of his shaking bed, scared shitless, and the mattress would be moving so much that it would shake off of the box spring. And if that's not enough to leave a skid mark in your whitey tighties, oftentimes Roland would wake up and use a voice that was not his at all. It was as if something were inside of him talking through him. Of course, this didn't go unnoticed. Obviously, the neighbors started talking about the shit that goes bump in the night at Roland's house. Everyone around their house could hear the screaming, the yelling, the banging. So this wasn't something just between the family members. There were so many people that witnessed all the shit that they went through. But the neighbors thought, oh, that Roland, he is such a handful. He is just a troubled kid. They didn't know that the kid was actually possessed, because this isn't even 1950 yet, so people are like, possession? Who's she? But people outside of Roland's house were starting to catch on, because it wasn't just inside his home that shit was happening. He would experience paranormal activity basically everywhere that he went. While he was at school during class, books, papers, pencils, anything around him on his desk would just fly off of it. And in several cases, his school desk would actually start vibrating and moving across the floor. But sadly, because he was kind of known as being a prankster, the teachers thought that he was just pulling a fast one, and they kind of scolded him. Like, whether or not this actually happened, how freaking frustrating would it be to be terrorized by something unseen and have everyone just think that you're playing a practical joke on them? This really affected Roland so much that he stops going to school altogether, and people don't know if he's just got some mental issues or what the hell is happening. At this point, during the middle of every night, Roland would wake up convulsing, and his parents knew that he probably wasn't doing this naturally, and they thought maybe this is an illness we don't know about, so they took him to a specialist. Roland goes to the doctor's office and walks out with a perfectly clean bill of health. The doctor says, you have no kind of illness that'll alter your physical or mental state. You're perfectly fine. So the parents say, let's take him to a psychologist. Maybe he has manic depression or schizophrenia. In those days, those two terms were very popular to throw around, so if you had anything wrong with you, it was probably one of those two. Remember, this was 1949, so psychiatry really wasn't at the height of its heyday, but with what they did have, they too determined that Roland was perfectly fine. He's just a normal, everyday kid who just has a little bit of energy and is probably acting out. So his parents take him to several more specialists, all who agree that yes, he's high-strung, but otherwise he's perfectly fine. Nobody could figure out what was happening, because what was happening was way beyond any explanation that psychology could offer. Like, there was just way too much freaky shit happening both to Roland and around the house for this to be something natural. So if the medical community can't help Roland, the next step his parents wanted to take was religious intervention. Roland's mom talked to their pastor, Reverend Schultz, who happened to be very interested in parapsychology, which in a basic nutshell is like the study of mental phenomena that really can't be explained by normal psychology. And Reverend Schultz thinks maybe there's a poltergeist in their house. A poltergeist is a ghost or an energy that'll slam doors, shut lights off suddenly, drain the batteries from your vibrator, just wreak havoc on your life. And they thought that is it, because this totally described exactly what was happening in the house. But Schultz was also a skeptic, so he asked if he could observe Roland outside of the house to see if it followed him. Since a poltergeist typically didn't go from home to home, if Roland was still having these supernatural experiences outside of his house, they could rule a poltergeist out. So they make a plan. Schultz says, okay, Roland, come over and stay the night with my wife and I, and we can observe you. They all snuggle in their own beds, it's cozy and warm, and they shut the lights out to go to sleep. And the moment light leaves the room, Roland's bed begins shaking violently, and Schultz flips the light switch thinking that Roland is pranking him. He soon realizes that there is no way this scrawny little kid could ever make this huge bed move, so he says, okay, I can fix this. Why don't you go to sleep in the armchair across the room? Roland's like, okay, whatever you say. So he goes, he sits in the chair, he gets all snuggled in with the comforter, and within a second of the calm, the chair begins spinning and shaking side to side violently, so hard that it flips backwards and tips Roland out of it. Schultz is like, what the hellish fuck is happening, bro? So Schultz pulls a mattress off of the bed, puts it down next to his, and tells Roland to sleep right next to my bed, and I can keep an eye right on you. Poor kid just wants a damn minute of shut-eye. Well, just as Roland closes his eyes, his mattress is sucked under Schultz's bed and pushed up against the box spring, smushing his face. And Schultz is like, okay, this is not a poltergeist. And so now what started off as simple bed shaking was getting pretty physical. Over the course of the next 4 days, each night Roland would wake up with 3 long scratches down his arm, and they'd get deeper and deeper each night, almost as if some invisible thing took claws and just dug them into him. Could these be the same claws that had been scratching inside the walls earlier? Maybe even the same thing that knocked 3 times and said it was Aunt Tilly? Don't think it was Aunt Tilly. Schultz, who is Lutheran, wants so badly to help Roland, but he knows this is beyond his expertise. So he suggests Roland be taken to a Catholic priest because they might know a little bit more about being possessed. When Roland entered the priest's office, everyone felt that the room went so cold that you could almost see your breath. The telephone went sliding off of the priest's desk, and this voice erupted out of Roland that was not his. A voice that was screaming serious profanities at this priest. I know teenagers can be moody, we've all been there, but this was a bit much. The pastor's name was Father Hughes, and immediately he knew that there was some kind of dark entity inside of Roland. Could this be the devil himself? Hughes thought so, but he was like, why? Just like so many people would later think, Hughes was the first person to believe that when Roland was trying to communicate with the dead, this gave a demon the opportunity to sashay in, purse first, and take control over Roland's body. And he thought there were multiple gateways for the devil to be able to attach itself to you. They could slip through the cracks of somebody's mind who might be a little bit more vulnerable, maybe somebody who's trying to get over a family death. After all, there are haunted places, why wouldn't there be haunted people? Hughes sees this as a dire situation, so he contacts Archbishop O'Boyle in Washington, D.C. and requests an exorcism. And Hughes was adamant about this. Like, you can't just walk up to any archbishop and request an exorcism. It has to be proven that real shit is happening. And the archbishop was absolutely convinced. So Roland is admitted into a mental facility under the pseudonym Roland Doe, and he's strapped by his wrists, he's strapped by his ankles. Like, there's no way this kid can move. And by now, Roland is anything but himself, especially with Father Hughes by his side reading the prayers of exorcism. This young kid is writhing and screaming in what sounds like agony, and whatever's inside of Roland pulls his hand out of the restraint, and a witness viewing all this sees Roland reach under the bed, grab a spring, and hurl the curved end of it into Father Hughes' arm. Roland then pulls this piece of metal down Father Hughes' arm from shoulder to fingertips, and he ends up needing 100 stitches. And anyone who knew Father Hughes said that after that incident, he was not the same, and he did suffer lifelong issues with that arm. Well, somehow, a few days later, Roland was discharged from the hospital, but he plunges headfirst deeper into this demonic possession. Roland's first night back after getting released, he's getting ready for bed, he's buttoning up his nightshirt, and suddenly he's overcome with a serious pain across his torso like a knife is carving into his skin. He runs to the bathroom, opens up his shirt, and sees on his abdomen the bloody word Lewis etched onto his skin, just like the claw marks had done on his arms a week earlier. Roland's parents think, maybe this is a sign. After all, we do have family in St. Louis, Missouri. Maybe we should head there. This was only a week into the possession, and the family was already at the end of their rope. They were grasping for straws in thin air and had no idea what the hell to do. So a sporadic move to St. Louis, Missouri didn't sound like a bad idea. Maybe their relatives could aid in some kind of spiritual or mental help. Whatever you believe, whether this was mental or actually a possession, whatever, it was enough to make the family up and move quite a long distance within the matter of like a day. Like something completely earth-shattering was happening to them. When the family arrives to St. Louis, they immediately move right in with Roland's uncle, who are devout Catholics. They're hoping that just being surrounded by their strong faith will be enough to ward off these evil spirits. And the family welcomed Roland in. They knew him so well, they loved him to death, but they noticed that this isn't the same Roland. Like something was a little bit off, especially at night. And it very quickly became clear that whatever was inside Roland followed him to St. Louis. Just like back at home, he goes to bed and immediately shit starts happening. The bed starts moving, books start flying off shelves. He's screaming and howling, and once again, this poor 13-year-old kid is just terrified. terrified. And his uncle would say that while Roland lived there, the stool that was across the room would always just tip over. Even if they piled books on it or put heavy objects on top, it would just fall over and smash to the ground. And within a few times of that happening, they realized this boy is seriously tormented. Roland's cousin also lived there, and she saw everything that was happening. She at the time was going to university and approached Father Bishop at her school to tell him what was going on and ask for help. Bishop says, okay, why don't I come over tonight and I can observe this young man, and he brought along a man named Father Bowdern for a little bit of extra protection. These are hard times, you can never be too safe. The two men make their way over to Roland's new home. They observe him for well over an hour and nothing happens. They saw absolutely no sign of possession. Honestly, of all the times for the demon to take a lunch break, it had to be now. So the two men leave the house, but the moment they step outside, they instantly hear noises coming up from Roland's bedroom. They hear screams and loud bangs. I guess a bottle of holy water that they had left on the nightstand had hurled its way across the room, and Roland was screaming in fright. By now, he is somewhat used to this, so he tries to fall back asleep, but he's immediately awoken by the sound of a bookshelf somehow moving itself to block his door. So the priests haul ass back inside and they witness all of this happening, which made them realize that sure as shit, there's some kind of demonic action going down here. Father Bowdern knows absolutely nothing about exorcism, so he consults what's called the Roman ritual, which is kind of like a manual from the 17th century that just tells you the rules, the rituals, and prayers that you need to conduct an exorcism. And just as a random ass side note, I guess exorcism isn't specifically a Catholic thing. I guess almost every religion has training on becoming an exorcist of some sort, but I guess at least here in the USA, the Catholic Church is kind of known for their exorcisms. I'm not an expert, so I don't know. Anyways, back in the 40s, exorcism wasn't quite as popular as it was today, so Bowdern decides to research the very well-known exorcism of Emma Schmidt. She had shown very similar signs of possession as Roland was showing, and she needed 23 straight days of exorcism just to become free. And I guess there's like 4 stages of possession. The first is a clear sign that there's some kind of dark presence. The second is experiencing physical attacks from a demon. The third is mental attacks from a demon. And then the final one is full-blown possession. Roland was already experiencing the first 3 signs, so the priest wanted to get in there like ASAP to start a formal exorcism before he even got to the 4th stage. At this point, Father Bowdern makes a ringy-dingy to the Archbishop out in DC and says, do you think maybe you could do the exorcism? Bowdern didn't really feel he had the qualifications or that he was spiritually ready for this job, and so he didn't want to fuck shit up. But the Archbishop says, sorry, bud, you have no choice, you have to do this. So Bowdern's like, well, shit. So, on March 16th of 49, he makes his way to Roland's new home for the first day of exorcism. Packed his little lunch, he's got a juice box, he is ready to go. No, he didn't. He was scared absolutely shitless. With him is Father Bishop, as well as a seminary student named Walter Halloran, who both volunteered to assist him. And I think it's safe to say that they were probably all equally as scared. They know that whatever the fuck is possessing Roland at any point could easily possess them, and like, who wants to deal with that? They've seen the bed shaking, they've seen books fly off shelf. This is a lot to take in for them. But they are determined to purge whatever's inside Roland, no matter what it costs and no matter how long it takes. This wasn't going to be some high noon shootout with some demon either. They had all done their research, their mental prep, like nobody was going into this to prove their bravery. Like any of us probably would be, the 3 of them were shaking in their boots. And the Archbishop told the 3 of them that this whole ordeal needed to be kept completely secret. But Bowdern's thinking, no, we need to document all of this, and so he actually kept a secret diary. He could tell already that this was an extreme case and he could make a little how-to manual for future exorcisms. But that diary that he kept is basically where this whole story is coming from. So, they begin their exorcism. They start by laying out some religious items, a crucifix, some holy water, a silk purple stole to wrap around the priest and the possessed, and they begin reading the rituals. And a moment, just one single moment after the prayer starts, the priest starts screaming out in horror because they're seeing all of these bloody claw marks appear on Roland's body. Roland writhed in pain as each new mark pierced him, and nobody had any idea where the next mark would be. The priests shout for the demon to reveal itself, but it refuses and Roland keeps writhing. They put crosses on him, holy objects, but nothing is working, and suddenly he screams out even louder and starts clawing at his chest. They unbutton his shirt and see the word help imprinted onto his skin as if stamped with a hot iron. And the priests are like, his hands were not tied up, but there's no way that he could have done this to himself. himself like we were watching him the whole time. After 9 hours of writhing from resistance, Roland finally collapses and falls asleep. Going into this, the priests were skeptical but scared about Roland's possession. Now they were just scared. Especially because now after the first exorcism, whatever was inside of Roland seemed to be getting stronger. So the next day they come back for a second exorcism, which, to the great relief of the priests, seemed to do the trick. By the third day, Roland was pretty much back to normal. He was playing like a 13-year-old, acting like he did before anything strange started happening, so the family thought, I'll be damned, the shit actually works. Gonna have to write you guys a Yelp review. But by that evening, Roland's mood switched like a light. When the priests arrived to continue the ritual, Roland is already turned into like a rabid animal. He's writhing around, snarling, and he's even biting the people holding him down. And the priests would hold holy items to his pillow trying to lure the demon out, but the closer that they got to him with it, the worse that he would get. Hours and hours went by until finally he began making retching noises like he was gonna vomit. At this point, nobody really knows what the hell is gonna happen, so they think, well, maybe he's gonna throw up the demon, so they rush across the room and open up the windows, just in case this demon flies out. After minutes of heaving, Roland finally throws up, and instantly there's like a calm hush in the room. Everyone's like, thank fuck, the demon is gone. But no, honey, not even close. They were dead wrong. That night at 2 a.m., Roland starts feeling weird feels inside his stomach. Not churning, but like actual movement, like something was inside of him trying to get out. So he starts screaming that the demon is coming back. I guess it was later found that it's actually quite common for the possessed person to be tricked into thinking that whatever was inside of them is out after they've thrown up. This makes everyone's guard go down, especially the priests who at this late hour had already headed home. But by 3 a.m. the priests were all called back because the family was realizing that the exorcism was far from over. So the gentlemen come back and they continue the exorcism ritual. Except now things are getting worse. The ground feels like it's vibrating. The walls sound like beams are breaking. At one point, one of the priests starts screaming in fright because he's standing at the foot of the bed and the mattress starts lifting up a foot off the ground and then crashes back down. None of them thought anything like this was possible, yet here they were witnessing it with their own eyes. And so the priests are like, just to make sure there's not like a gas leak and we're just going a little bit crazy, let's bring a scientist, Professor Bub, in and he can observe. So the professor comes into the room, sits in the corner to take notes, and is very skeptical and very calm. That is, until the priests begin their ritual and he sees the fucking nightstand lift up, and he knows, yeah, magnetic forces can cause levitation, but this shit is unreal. And the priests had done their research. They knew that in previous exorcisms, levitation was very, very common. It was used as a scare tactic. So, as scary as it may be, if a person starts levitating, they were instructed to put their hand on the body and say a prayer while guiding it back down. What a job! Can you imagine coming home from work and somebody saying, well, how was your day? And you'd be like, it was good, but my arm's a little sore from pushing down levitating bodies all day. I joke, but ooh, that's creepy. Anyways, apart from the levitating mattress and nightstand, while the priests were doing their thing, objects started flying around the room as if somebody were throwing things at them. Dark, demonic sounds would just come out of nowhere, and after several days of this, it really started to take a toll on Roland's family. Within a week of starting Roland's exorcism, his mom goes into therapy for anxiety, stress, and serious depression over watching her son go through this. Everyone living under that roof was getting negatively affected. They were getting physically ill from lack of sleep, from stress. Whatever was living inside of Roland was affecting them all. Which brings us to March 23rd, day 8 of Roland's exorcism. At this point, Father Bowden decides that it would probably be best to get Roland out of this house, so he transfers him to the rectory of a local college church. But now the students there become concerned. They'd be walking to class and the rectory windows would just burst open and they'd hear this animalistic shrieking coming from inside like a constipated mongoose. This exorcism was causing so much unwanted attraction on the campus, but the priests had no choice. They had to continue. Every night they would begin and Roland would start writhing and shaking and start screaming vulgar threats at them, which only seemed to get even more vulgar after the stroke of midnight. And he was saying the types of things that a 13-year-old boy at that time really shouldn't have even known. I guess he didn't watch my channel then. But he would curse the priests and then the curses would turn into sexual language far beyond what probably any of us would ever say. And he would spit at them with incredible accuracy. Like these poor priests were just covered in loogies like Roland was shooting at a carnival. And I don't know where all this liquid was coming from. Roland wasn't denied water, but he certainly really wasn't drinking that much, yet he was constantly emptying his bladder with copious amounts of urine. And things seemed to be coming out of every end of him, and it was so odoriferous that the priests would have to open up the windows just to breathe. Sounds like somebody had Chipotle. But after over a week of performing these exorcisms, it seemed as though Roland was actually getting stronger. He was showing unnatural signs of strength, like a constant adrenaline rush, and the 3 men that were holding him down wasn't enough. He would break free and start punching the priests in their face, a sign that, "Boo, this is just getting started." So just within 10 days, one priest has 100 stitches in his arm. They all have black eyes with bruises all over them. Roland ends up breaking one of the priest's noses with a punch. He kicks another in the groin and the priest vomits from pain. So they say, "I'm sorry, but he could not stay here in the rectory." So they pack him up and bring him back to his uncle's house. And I'm sure his family was just like, great. But over the next 4 days, Roland actually stays suspiciously calm. Let's take a suspicious shot for that. But they all know there is no way that this kid went from a demonic, writhing person to a normal kid overnight. That just doesn't happen. They knew that these days were like spinning a jack in the box, and they were just waiting for that crazy shit to pop out again. Which, of course, it did. It started with Roland saying that he needs to draw something. His uncle was an architect, and so they had big sheets of paper which they gave to Roland, and Roland starts drawing these weird-ass symbols. The family calls the priests back to decipher these drawings, and they read, "I will stay 10 days and then return after 4 days are up. I am the devil himself." Well, guess what tonight is? The end of the 4th day. So that day, one of the priests suggests that Roland, who is brought up Lutheran, maybe be baptized as a Catholic. Family's like, "Okay, he seems normal now, so let's do it." Well, on the drive to the church, Roland becomes possessed again. He's flailing around in the back seat and eventually hurls himself to the front seat to try to take control of the wheel. The car is veering left and right uncontrollably, and the family almost dies in a crash at one point, but they end up arriving safely to the church. Roland is dragged in, kicking and screaming with an entire group of men holding him down, and he ends up getting very quickly baptized, but it doesn't work. When he arrives back home, he begins physically attacking his family. He wraps his hands around his aunt's neck and starts choking her. He's kicking, he's punching, he's screaming. He's basically doing the same thing that he would to the priests. And the priests are like, "Your family is not safe, Roland. You need to go back to Maryland." At this point, Roland has lost a quarter of his body weight. He looks like walking death. He needs serious treatment. Father Bowdern goes back with them to Maryland and searches all around Maryland for a hospital or convent that'll take Roland in. But after he describes to them what's happening to Roland, nobody will take him. They don't care if this is psychological or demonic. Nobody will touch Roland with a 10-foot pole. So they pack their shit back up and haul their asses back to St. Louis to try this exorcism thing again. And Father Bowdern was like, "I found us a local hospital. We can work inside their psych ward, and it's run by Catholic monks." And I guess this place was kind of known for performing rituals like this, but even so, word was spreading that there was this kid who was basically climbing up the walls. And at this time, it was Holy Week, which is one of the most sacred times for Catholics, but the week turns into absolute hell and chaos for the priests working with Roland. One of the monks later gave one single interview regarding what had happened just before he died. He said that during the exorcism, he saw Roland pull one of the purple shawls off of the priest, and within a split second, it was torn into shreds. And then a few moments later, Roland straightened up like a board and began levitating feet off of the mattress. Glass decanters were flying around the room, hitting walls, shattering into pieces, which hit the priests and cut open fresh wounds. And in the matter of just 3 weeks, Father Bowdern had lost 40 pounds because all he was doing was standing next to Roland performing rituals. He was covered in bruises and boils and bites and burns, but he was hell-bent on getting this thing out of Roland. A month goes by of straight-up exorcisms, and they continue on. They begin chaining holy relics all over Roland's body, which start to burn his skin. Then Roland starts shaking and laughing maniacally and begins talking in a deep, low man's voice, telling the priests that Roland is his prisoner and that Roland has to say one word to get him out of his body, a word that Roland would never say. Well, that day, one of the priests bring in a small figurine statue of St. Michael, and Roland starts seizing and foaming at the mouth, and he's overcome by an entirely new voice. A voice that claimed to be St. Michael and demanded that the devil get out of this boy's body. Roland now starts convulsing even more violently than he ever had with any of the other exorcisms. And during those convulsions, he loses consciousness and starts having this vision. In this vision, he sees a large angelic figure of St. Michael with a flaming sword holding back demons, screaming the word Dominos over and over again. And Roland was shaking so hard that his wounds all over his body were reopening and he was just oozing blood everywhere. But suddenly, at the height of his possessed state, the word Dominos begins echoing out of his mouth. He writhed in agony, his body twisting in contorted motions, screaming at the top of his lungs when suddenly, just as quick as the possession had started, he relaxed, sank back into his bed, and breathed out, saying, "He's gone." Immediately, Roland was back to normal. The seizures, the spitting, the deep voices, gone. But of course, Bowdern is skeptical. Has the demon actually left? After all, there had been multiple little breaks within their exorcism. So Bowdern asks for a sign that this is over, and within seconds, the whole campus is taken over by an ear-splitting boom. People start running in all directions, fearing an explosion, but the priests stay right there. After a minute or so, someone comes charging into the room and says that that loud noise had came from the church where a mysterious large figure of Saint Michael had appeared. Bowdern was like, okay, that's a good sign. I can go home now. Can kick back, go get some Denny's, call it a day. But other than the diary that was kept, none of the priests spoke about anything that happened, even on their deathbed. They stayed completely hush about it. Stories were kind of leaked to the press, but the final report of the exorcism is locked away in the Roman Catholic archives. So really, like, who knows? Afterwards, though, Roland actually led a pretty damn good life. He went to school, became a NASA rocket scientist. He has so many patents for things that he created for them. He got married, he had kids, and he had a very fulfilling life. I have no idea if he's still alive. By now, he'd be well into his 80s, and I know that he's never ever spoken about what's happened. But I know the hospital that Roland had stayed at in St. Louis has had several residual signs of the exorcism. For example, I guess a black hand stain would always appear over the bed Roland stayed in, and even when they'd paint over it, it would always reappear. People would hear things in that room, and even just walking by it, people would get the chills. But after Roland's exorcism, they ended up getting rid of all the furniture in that room. Like, they did not want to fuck around with anything, and I think they actually ended up tearing that wing down. But before demolition, the crew was going room to room just to make sure everyone was out of it, and they found a locked room with just a single desk right in the middle of the room. Like, how fucking creepy. And when they opened the drawer in the desk, there was one handmade book that mentioned an exorcism, which turned out to be a copy of the diary that was kept, which is where we get this story from. And investigators also found that one of the priests working with Roland had taken on the demon, and they were actually housed at a hospital and tied up 24/7 until the priest died sometime in the 80s. But I guess they were kept in a locked and secured room because objects in the room would fly all over the place, just like they did with Roland. And I don't know if the writer of The Exorcist knew that that had happened, but in the movie, spoiler alert, one of the priests ends up taking the demon on and then taking their own life. So maybe that's a coinkydink, but it is suspicious, so here's that. So you can totally see how the movie The Exorcist was definitely inspired by these events. It's like they took all the shit that happened with Roland and smushed it into a tighter timeline so it seemed even more dramatic. Not that Roland's wasn't dramatic. Like, no, his head didn't turn all the way around, his skin didn't turn pasty and green, but a lot of shit that did happen in the movie did also happen to Roland, allegedly. So now that we had the juicy story out of the way, I do want to say that there were investigations into this, and there was no evidence that any of this actually happened. In other words, everything was basically just hearsay. Psychologists thought he had mental issues, priests thought he was possessed, writers just thought this was a great story, and no matter who the story came from, it seemed like the story kind of stretched to fit their own agenda. So I guess it's kind of up to you what you want to believe. Are you scared yet? My apologies in advance if this gives you nightmares. I realize these are for sleep, and that probably wasn't the best compilation for sleep, but, you know, do your thing. But my darling, please make sure to follow me on social media. I'll link you down below, and have a beautiful rest of your day.